This one happened a few weeks back, and it all happened really fast, no more than a matter of a few seconds. Here we go. So I run a delivery company that brings lunch meals to schools, you know, the ones they feed to children. I basically start working at 3 a.m. I load my refrigerated truck with all the meals, a couple hundred a day, to deliver to a small school that doesn't have a real kitchen on site, but they heat up the meals for the kids at lunch. I have to start work this early because, of course, all the schools have to be delivered to by noon. So this particular morning, I've literally just started my delivery rounds as I was arriving at the very first school that I deliver to. It's a village next to a big road, kind of on top of a mountain. And to get to the school, you have to drive all the way up to the top of the village, going on little sinus streets. Then the school itself is a bit offset from the road. There are a few houses around, but on the very spot that I stop my truck to make my delivery, it's just the school on one side of the road, while on the other, there's a few meters of a large grass band set in front of an empty parking lot. At this specific spot, there's absolutely no light, since the public lights are off until 5 a.m., and I'm here around 4 a.m. every morning. My only way to get some light to get to the door where I need to deliver the meals is to leave the engine of my truck running, so I can light up the wall of the school with my headlights. Everything else around me is literally pitch black. So I do my delivery, come back out, shut the back doors of my truck, and then I realize that I have to take a piss. So I stop by the grass that is just against my truck to do so before hopping back in and continuing my route. As I said, it's pitch black out. I'm facing darkness, so I really can't see anything in front of me, except for the lights from the city that are probably about 10 miles away downhill. I'm chilling here while I'm peeing, looking at the sky because there's no clouds, and since there's no public lights on, I can see the stars pretty well. As I'm finishing up and lowering my head back down to my normal line of sight, with the lights of the city downhill in front of me, I see a silhouette passing in front of my truck. It happened quickly, but I thought I could see the shape of a head and shoulders passing by, no more than a few meters in front of me, off in the darkness. At this moment, I was done and closing my belt back up to get back in my truck, and I kind of instantly freaked out. Started walking right alongside my truck to get back in. To give you reference, I was behind the truck peeing, not close to the driver's door. All the while thinking to myself, nah man, you didn't see a head and shoulders. You didn't see anything. Maybe just some leaves or a branch getting in your view, and you misinterpreted that. But I wasn't buying that at all. I was sure of what I saw, and I was quietly freaking out inside. But now is when I get to the worst part. Once I'm back in my truck, ready to leave, clutching in to get my truck into first gear, I take a look in my left rearview mirror as I'm starting to slowly put my truck in motion. And that's when I see it. I see a figure behind my truck, peeking around the back to check on me as I got back into my truck. This confirmed that I didn't imagine it. There was someone here at 4 a.m. in the complete darkness, pitch black, just walking here for some reason, no more than a few meters in front of me. They could clearly see me because, remember, I left the headlights on to light up the wall. So I'm watching pitch black, but they can see me clearly. The engine of my truck was running the entire time, so I didn't hear if anybody had made any noises or left any clue that they were actually there. This person actually followed me at the back of my truck. For whatever reason, this person stood at the back of my truck and continued to scope me out. I got on my way and did the rest of my deliveries that day, but I was out of sorts for the rest of my shift. It freaked me out, and if I'm being honest, it still kind of does now. I don't have to deliver to any schools for the next 2 weeks because it's spring holiday here in France. But I'm genuinely a touch scared to go back there. I might be a big dude, but I find this scary as How could you even hope to defend yourself if somebody wanted to attack you in that situation? if they can clearly see you, but you can't them? About 5 years ago, when I was 16, I was dating this guy who was about a year older than me. We'll call him Mitch. My parents never let us hang out alone, but to my surprise, they let him come on a family camping trip with us. I think they allowed this because it was kind of a special occasion, since the camping season was coming to an end, and also because the site that we were going to had been kind of a tradition for us. But this season, when it closed, it would never again reopen for camping, because people had ruined it by dumping trash and trespassing on nearby properties. Anyway, so my dad, mom, Mitch, and I are all going on this camping trip. Mitch and I have our own tent. My parents have theirs. We have an amazing first day out there. We went up on a Friday morning and planned to stay through Sunday night. Mitch and I spent the day walking along paths, catching lizards, swimming, exploring, and talking about creepypastas that involved the woods. At some point, we were exploring and realized that there were nearby properties, maybe 2 or 3 cabins about 3 or 4 miles down a dirt road from our campsite. Later that evening, my parents made a big fire. We had burgers for dinner, my parents were drinking, and Mitch and I were trying to make s'mores, while all the while trying to pretend that we weren't terrified after talking about camping horror stories all day long. I'm in the middle of trying to explain the rake to my sloshed parents, and Mitch audibly gasps because there's a guy walking down the road from the direction of the cabins. Again, it was like 4 miles off. So we all get kind of quiet. My dad calls out to the guy, something like, "Hey, how's it going?" And the guy doesn't say anything back. My dad calls out yet again, yelling out, "Are you camping? We have this spot reserved." Not in like a mean way, just trying to get the guy to respond. The guy still doesn't say anything, not until he's about 25 feet away from our campsite, which was weird as hell because it took like 2 minutes of silent walking to get to us after we first called out to him. He comes up closer, and that's when he speaks. "Hey there, folks. I just like walking around. Sometimes I take a walk down from my cabin and see if there's anyone out here camping." So this guy sits down and talks to my parents for a while. My parents are super drunk at this point, and I think they've been smoking pot pretty much all day because they were surprisingly chill with this strange man appearing and were very friendly. They all talked about what a shame it was that the camping season was ending and how terrible it was that the campsite itself was closing. Mitch and I whispered back and forth, and were talking about just how weird this guy was. How weird it was that he walked this far, didn't talk at first, and just invited himself to our campsite. Then we started to notice other things. Mitch pointed out that the guy's zipper was down. He had on some lengthy cargo shorts, but his boxers were poking out of his zipper. And then I pointed out that in this entire interaction, at this point the guy had been here maybe 10 or 15 minutes. He hadn't even acknowledged us with a single word, despite sitting right across the fire from us and continuously looking at us. Then we both started to notice how the guy was mimicking my parents. He went from being stone cold sober to acting like he was drunk. He began slurring his words, getting a bit wobbly, laughing, and being much louder. Mitch and I were a bit on edge. We had been talking about creepy campfire stories all day, and this encounter felt like a creepy campfire tale. The guy just kept acting stranger and stranger, and there was no way to say something to my parents without him hearing. Mitch and I stood up and walked a few feet behind us, over to the cooler, and pretended to get some stuff out to make hot dogs. As soon as we had backed off a few feet, the guy switched the convo to talk about us. He asked my parents if this was a double date, and they explained that I was their kid and Mitch was my boyfriend. That's when the man asked how old we were. They told him I was 16, Mitch was 17. The man asked if we were good kids, They said yeah. Then he asked, well, where are they going to sleep tonight? I froze and looked at Mitch, who had reached out and squeezed the out of my forearm in fear and was staring at me wide-eyed. To my drunk and maybe high parents, this question didn't seem weird enough to even pause. The guy was still pretending to be drunk, and he was really playing it up at this point, nearly falling off the tote that he was sitting on. My parents explained, we got them their own tent. The guy said something like, oh, that's awful nice of you. That'll be an experience for them. I can't explain it, but the way he said that, it was just so sexual. I think this is when my parents kind of keyed into the weirdness. I looked at my mom, who looked sort of slack-jawed and uncomfortable, and was staring at me with a quizzical look. The guy just kept talking, asking them, well, I see one tent. Where's the other? My dad was still talking to him. He could barely keep his eyes open at this point. He was so out of it. My dad motioned towards my parents' tent and said that was theirs, then threw his arm back super exaggerated in the direction of our tent, which wasn't really that far off at all, and was like, theirs is way over there. The guy perked right up and actually stood up a bit, pointed to their tent and said, so that's yours, as my dad agreed. And their tent is in that direction? Also to which my dad agreed. At this point, I'm shaking my head at my mom, and she looks pretty sobered up. The guy keeps talking to my dad about the tents and about how he can't see Mitch and I's tent from there. It must be pretty well hidden, or very far off. And then that's so nice of my parents for letting us have some alone time. Mitch and I say we're going on a walk at this point, and despite the woods being pitch black and us being more than a fair share of creeped out, we go out walking on the trail that the guy happened to come from. We get far away enough to not hear them and can barely see the fire. That's when we pull out our phones to see if we have any cell signal, and of course, we don't. I'm being super dramatic and type out and send my friend a long message describing the situation, date, time, description of the guy, and that I love her. My phone gives me the message that it'll send the text when it finds service. The whole time I type, I'm reading it out loud to Mitch, and he's telling me stuff to add. We try to psych ourselves up and start walking back towards the campfire. The guy is gone, but I thought that maybe he was just off peeing, so I whispered to my mom, asking where he is. My parents are both like, he went back to his cabin a bit ago. He didn't pass you on the trail? This was a bit of a surprise to us. There was only one way in and out of our campground, so why didn't we see him? Now, in addition to being freaked out about the whole situation, we do feel a bit safer now that the guy's gone, and we can actually talk to my parents, and that's when it all comes flooding out at a mile a minute, telling my parents about how he didn't pass us, about his fly being down, about him acting drunk to match them, and about how he really pressed to know where we'd be sleeping that night. My mom agreed with us and said she noticed it too, and it really freaked her out. My dad was pretty trashed, and I think in a way to agree with the rest of us, also said that he got a creepy feeling from the guy. Mitch and I stayed attached to my parents and talked about the guy and how freaked out we were for about another hour. But that's when my parents started drifting off, saying that they were ready to go to bed. Mitch and I ran to our tent, hauled ass with the whole tent, including all of our belongings inside, and slid it right up next to my parents. We couldn't sleep all night long because every crunchy leaf made us think that that guy was creeping up on us. As the sun eventually came up, we realized that we were still alive and had made it through the night. We ended up finishing our camping trip as planned and didn't see that guy again. But as far as lasting impact goes, that guy definitely left one. I think that we all, Mitch and I mostly, were on edge for the rest of the weekend, always checking over our shoulders to see if anyone else was around or walking down the paths that we were on. And that really plays into fear during the night. when you can't see anything in the distance, and every sound you hear may have something sinister behind it. That was our last trip to that campground, and if I remember correctly, that was our last camping trip as a family. Most people want to end things on a good note. My family had our tradition end on a rather unsettling one. It's been a little over 2 years since I worked maintenance in 2 really shady apartments in Birmingham, Alabama. I had made some poor choices and my life was near rock bottom. $200 a week and a shitty apartment. Not bad for a struggling addict, not bad for a struggling drug addict, but far from ideal for anyone. I had been working with the Neshama Apartments for about 3 months when I met Tony. He was an average height, late 30s or early 40s Native American man. He kind of came out of nowhere, but that's not uncommon in that kind of living situation. He dressed nicer than most of us in that predicament, but overall seemed like a pretty normal guy. Now, these apartments are under code at best. Their whole purpose is to get the homeless off of the street, so I was grateful for what little I had, but these units were in such terrible shape that the job of maintenance that Tony and I held was almost comical. Tony was very skilled in flooring and plumbing, and he was a pretty funny guy. Really quiet, but he'd make quips every now and then with a northern accent. Over the next 2 months, Tony and I became friends. Well, if you can call it that. We worked together, lived next door to each other, and also used together. You see, Tony was very reserved until he did a line of coke. Then he'd start opening up. He'd start talking about an Indian mafia up north. He talked about how he was born into it. And I've got to be honest, I was high and so was he. So I began laughing because it sounded ridiculous, and I was pretty sure that it was a joke. However, I'll never forget the look on his face and in his eyes. It was this dead stare with a slight smirk, like he was somewhere else, reliving something. And it was terrifying. I said, "Hey man, if you ever need to talk." He said, "Nah man, it's fine. Another life. Let's go get some more coke." So we call up dude and went to meet him up the hill like usual. But that's when the guy's cousin called back and said our dude got hemmed up before hanging up. Tony said, "Shit, well, I know this other guy," and he proceeded to call him up. And as the guy rolls up, I kind of had this feeling in my stomach, the feeling that something wasn't right. Now, forgive my language, but this is how it went down. Tony had our money and was leaning into the car, and that's when I heard Tony yell, "Nah, that," and the guy tried to peel off. But Tony had a death grip on this man, dragging him through the driver's window. Tony screamed, "You trying to stiff me, bitch? Huh?" He hit this man so hard that I swear he was trying to punch through his face. He wouldn't stop, blood and flesh mixing with gravel on the road. I screamed, "Tony, stop. F this man, let's go." "F you, man. Check his pockets," Tony yelled. I said, "I've got the shit, man. Let's go, please." His face, his eyes, he just looked possessed. And with one more kick to this broken man's head, we fled off into the darkness. "What the f have you done, Tony? What did you do? I'm a f***ing white guy, bro. And you're a native. We stick out, you idiot. They're going to f***ing kill us," I shouted with tears in my eyes. "They won't do shit. I punked him out. Besides, that bitch didn't even see you. If he comes around again," he lifts his shirt up to flash a 9mm, "I'll dome him." Tony said this in a cold, matter-of-fact voice. His tone made me feel as if someone dropped icicles down my shirt. I've never met someone as terrifying as Tony in my life. The next morning, he told me a bit more, still coked out, mind you. Look, without saying too much, Tony told me that he worked in a series of Native American casinos as someone who dealt with loans and collections. If you couldn't pay up, Tony and another person like Tony would show up and handle it. He said, "Things are different on the reservations. That's what people don't get," as he calmly took a sip of his beer. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty fascinated with his stories. And I mean, come on, they were just stories, right? Over the next few months, my worry that someone would come for us settled down some, and we moved on with life fixing up apartments, doing drugs, rinse and repeat. Until one day we were working on a sink, kind of tweaking a little bit. And up until this point, I would listen to his mafioso stories with a childlike wonder. But on this day, he told a story that kind of made me feel sick. He told me about this social security scheme that basically consisted of him and his bosses cashing social security checks of people that had, quote, cashed in their souls. He said, "We had 6 going until it all started falling apart. Someone tipped off." "Y'all finished yet?" the drunk tenant asked. "Yep," Tony smiled and said while cleaning up his tools. He smiled and walked out right by me, but I was still stunned from what I had just heard. If he was telling the truth, then he's a cold-hearted monster that's also on the run. And if he's lying, then he's incredibly f***ed up in the head. At around 3 a.m. that night, I found out what it was. I was woken up by the loudest bang I've ever heard. After the bang, a flood of blinding light filled the entire apartment complex, in addition to a lot of shouting from outside. "What the hell is happening?" I yelled to my roommate. I ran to the front door and opened it to an armed and armored U.S. Marshal in a sea of blue lights. "Get back inside, right now," the Marshal said sternly with a rifle pointed down, but definitely in my direction. So that's what I did. Seeing cops rush our apartment complex is nothing new, but this is the most intense I've ever seen. The next morning when I came outside, I noticed Tony's door had been smashed in. Holy shit, I thought, while I was walking to the apartment manager's office. I asked, "What the hell happened last night?" She proceeded to tell me that Tony had been on the run for a while and had somehow fooled his way into a government-funded HUD apartment complex and job with said government-funded apartments, all with an assumed identity. She then turned to me and said with a shocked look, "Tony hurt a lot of people." Every hair on my body stood on end, and all I could get out was, "Oh." I'm not much for conspiracies, but there was nothing on the news about this arrest. I can't find anything on Google about it. Then again, it's pretty embarrassing that a state-funded homeless program let in an on-the-run fugitive and then paid him to work maintenance. Never saw anything on the news about Tony. He was never really brought up around the complex again after that. I've since gotten on my feet and left the apartment and that way of life behind. But the moral that sticks with me to this day is that you never truly know what's going on in the head of the man next to you. When I was in college, I found myself Ubering to make money. This was in Southern California, and LA at the time was a constant flow of work. Occasionally, you'd pick people up in a nice area, and they'd tell you that they were sleeping with someone in a relationship, or that they themselves were cheating. This was depressingly common. I think that saying what they were doing to someone gave them this weird kind of relief. Once, I drove someone from Hollywood to Hemet. He was very charming and funny. When I dropped him off, it was a big blue building that they buzzed us into. The dude left me a $200 cash tip. I later found out this was what is known as gold base for the Church of Scientology. If you don't know what that is, it's a completely normal, not weird at all in any way location, owned by the Church of Scientology. Feel free to Google it. A few months into my taxi career, insurance companies started using rideshare service, and some people who were more down on their luck would use it. Sometimes this was people just trying to get their kids to school, but sometimes it was much sadder. I can't tell you how many times I showed up to a doctor's office to see someone with accessibility limitations have their face drop at seeing my tiny car instead of a van like they needed. The clients that had substance problems were the types of interactions that would stay with you. Once I picked a man up going to a dental appointment, and I drove him for about half an hour. He told me about how he used to run drugs in the 90s until they caught him with a few pounds of coke. He told me about when he was moved from Nevada to Florida for trial, how he traveled handcuffed in a van, how the cops would stop only once a day at McDonald's for their $1 menu item of the day. He asked me to stop at a liquor store, and he chugged a tiny bottle of booze, shoved some mints into his mouth, then sipped on a soda. This guy smelled like pure alcohol when I dropped him off at his dentist. Near my house, there was a methadone clinic. I would get up before dawn to be able to take those rides. Early bird gets the worm, right? Almost always, there were sweet and thankful people. Sometimes they were a little bit out of it, but I never felt like I was in any danger or anything like that. Just good people going through tough times. These rides were the most consistently depressing. People who were going to court clearly drunk or high. Older women who had trouble requesting a ride and had been waiting in the parking lot of their dialysis place into the night. They tell their stories sometimes. A person who was going to court for a child custody case. People struggling with mental illness. Some mornings were downright exhausting. Being up that early, you'd hit another crowd that I had never anticipated. Funeral goers. The saddest funeral ride was when a man and a woman got into my back seat. Rather than speaking to me, the man handed me a neon printout of a map of a cemetery with printed instructions on it saying what plot to go to. There was a written message on it that said, "Hello, I'm attending my father's funeral. My wife and I are deaf. Please follow these directions." The whole ride, I could hear them signing to one another and trying their best not to cry. There were also the retired gamblers. They'd leave their houses at 7 in the morning, take a $70 Uber out to the desert, and spend the whole day gambling at the reservation casinos. The desert is where I saw truly the weirdest things. The desert was the only place I had ever felt scared driving. It was in Temecula, the wine country of Southern California. Lots of wooded roads and desert. One day, I happened to pick up a lady just off the freeway at what I initially assumed was the edge of a golf resort, but it was actually an unpaved access road. It was late, and that area was especially dark. I was just getting ready to call the passenger when I saw them coming down the unpaved access road. It was a tall blonde woman in a very nice pantsuit. She was absurdly put together, considering she had walked God knows how long in heels down a dirt rock road. She got into the car, and she was very pleasant. She said she lived in a gated community that was hard to get Ubers to, and it was just easier to send me to the access road. I thought it was weird, but I didn't want to be creepy asking about where she lived exactly. She was friendly, chatty even. She said she was going to a dinner party, and as she spoke to me, I could feel her looking at me in the rearview mirror the entire ride. We drove a half hour away from the freeway to one of those rural chic neighborhoods that you would hear celebrities had huge parties in. Eventually, we reached the address, which was a paved road lined with trees. She told me to keep driving, and I didn't think much of it because, again, we were in a mansion-style neighborhood. We hit a white ranch-style fence after a minute or so going down the road. That was when I started to feel just a tad bit uneasy. There were around a dozen or so no trespassing signs, and one of those classic, "Forget the dog, beware of the owner" signs, with a guy pointing a pistol at you. I thought it was more than a little blunt to have that many signs, but hey, it's not my property. We drove for about a minute when we came to another fence. It was at the top of a hill, and it overlooked a barn with some lights off in the distance. I know this sounds weird, but it was unpleasant. I couldn't put my finger on it, It was just a barn with what looked like a barbecue going on. But being out in the woods without any light definitely had me freaked out. The passenger told me that I could just slide the gate open. As I approached the fence, I saw some signs that made me stop cold. Off to the side of the gate, not quite in the dark, but on the fringes of where my headlights would reach, there were metal signs with bullet holes through them, swastikas, and Confederate flags brightly displayed. Now, Southern California has a lot of white supremacist pockets. I had dropped off dozens of passengers in cities like Norco and driven down streets with people drinking in the garage, and a Nazi flag proudly hung behind them. It wasn't my favorite, but I wasn't spending any time in those neighborhoods more than I needed to. This, however, was different. It was after 11 p.m. at night, and I had no idea where I was. I opened the gate, and down the road, I saw what I assumed were cell phone flashlights lighting up and coming up the incline. This made me very uncomfortable. I went back, and I told the woman that I didn't think my car would make it back up the hill if I went down it. "What are you talking about? Just take me. It's right there," is what she said. She kept getting more heated, and I could see the lights slowly making their way up the hill. She kept telling me that I needed to cancel the ride, and that she wouldn't pay to not be taken the entire way. I told her the pin I was supposed to take her to was a mile back up the road, but I was so nervous that I relented and canceled on my end. She slammed my back door as she got out. I took off before I could see the cell phone light people get any closer. The road back was much rougher at the speed that I was going at. I felt a bump that felt like I hit a body, but I just kept going. My car was driving like shit, but I kept driving till I was well past the fence, out of the rich neighborhood, when I stopped at a gas station. My right rear tire was all the way up, and I needed to change it. There were a few nails that looked as if they'd been attached to a piece of wood, now firmly implanted on my tire. I was freaked out so hard in that moment, and sometimes I wish I had called the cops and reported it all. But of course, all that happened was I got a flat on a back road, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my night waiting on a cop car. I know it's far more likely that I freaked myself out than a bunch of Nazis planning to mess with some random Uber driver. But when I picked up a well-dressed businesswoman from a remote location, only to drop her off at a separate remote location, that gave me chills. Chills that I have trouble explaining even to this day. I recently found this sub, and reading through some of the stories here has brought back several unsettling memories from my own childhood. Figured I'd take a minute to share one of these instances with you all. I grew up in a major but relatively small US city. We lived in a neighborhood that bordered one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in our town. It was an extremely safe neighborhood, but it was still a city, so crime existed. I was taught young about street smarts and stranger danger, and thank the Lord I was, because on this particular day, it saved me and some of my best friends. The day of the encounter was a surprisingly warm, sunny summer day. My best friend lived a few houses down from me, and essentially lived at my house most of our childhood. He was over from sun up to sundown. We had another good friend with us that day, and were trying to decide what kind of trouble the three of us were going to get into. My family had the largest backyard in the neighborhood, so that was often ground zero for our shenanigans. But on this particular day, we decided to play out in front. If memory serves correctly, we had intended to do something involving our skateboards and water balloons. So there we were, filling up our water balloons at the spigot next to the garage, which was entirely visible from the street, when a white van with no windows pulls up. I know, doesn't get any more stereotypical than that. There was a very large man with a scraggly beard in the front, with trash piled up on the dash and passenger seat. Instantly, all three of us kids freeze. and I distinctly remember the feeling of a chill running up my spine. Something immediately felt wrong. This man then yells out to us, "You kids know what time it is?" We all kind of looked at each other for a few seconds before my best friend was able to stammer out the time in a very soft, intimidated kind of way. The man's response was, "What? I can't hear you. Why don't you come closer so I can hear you?" With that comment, my friend instantly tensed up, and he looked over at me, and I could see the fear in his face. Thankfully, we all had better sense than to walk up to this strange man's vehicle. That's when my buddy repeated the time at a volume that everyone on the block would be able to hear. In retrospect, I think that he may have been trying to yell loudly enough that my mom, who was in the backyard, might have heard us. After this exclamation, the man seemed slightly disappointed, probably because we didn't approach, and there was no denying that he heard that time. That's when he proceeds to offer us a laptop with absolutely no prompt or context. Just, "You kids want a laptop?" We all seemed to respond in unison, "No." The man in the van continues, "You sure? Because I've got a brand new Dell laptop for you." At this point, we all knew something was very off and decided to go play inside. As we head towards the door, he called out from behind us, "Where are y'all going? I thought we were talking. Don't leave." We went up to my room to play, and my room had a window which looked out onto the street. And for the next 30 minutes or so, that man just circled the block. It didn't seem like he stopped to talk to anybody else or harass any other kids out in their yards. But the fact that he stayed out in our neighborhood definitely gave me goosebumps as a kid. Man in the creepy pedo van with all the free laptops. May we never meet. At the time, we all shrugged the event off pretty quickly and didn't talk about it for years. We all still remember it like yesterday, and it affects us much more these days than it did back then. Thankfully, we had the whole stranger danger sense, and we're all safe. The worst part is that I grew up right across the street from an elementary school, and I sometimes find myself wondering if that's the reason he was on the block in the first place. Years ago, I lived in a condo with my two dogs, Smokey and the Bandit, brother and sister from the same litter that I got as puppies. For reference, their mother was a Sheltie, Smokey's father was a German Shepherd, and Bandit's was a Husky. They were both a good size, with long, thick coats, which made them look a lot bigger than they actually were. Personality-wise, they were both huge babies who loved people and would happily lick you to death, given the chance. One night, I got home late, like 2:30ish, and took them out for a run and a pee, something that I had done many times. I lived on the backside of a condo on the ground level, and the backyard was a huge park-like setting divided up by intersecting pathways, kind of like a square with 4 quadrants, surrounded by other condos and houses. The area right in front of my condo was a big field with a pathway about halfway through, running parallel to the condo. To the left was an area around the same size, divided up between a large playground area and a forested area with a pathway running through it. I headed straight out of my condo and across the pathway that divides it into the big open field. I had noticed someone, a tall, skinny man, dressed all in black, whistling while walking along the path that I had crossed over. As I ran with the dogs, I noticed that the whistling stopped, so I looked over my shoulder and saw the man had diverted off the path and was now walking in a direct line towards me. I immediately thought, oh this can't be good. I took a hard left and ran into the playground area. It was well lit, but there was also a huge man-made hill that I assume was leftover dirt from when something was built that had become grass covered. I ran around the hill into the dark, where that man wouldn't be able to see me. I stayed there for a minute to formulate my oh my god, what the plan. Luckily, I knew the area very well, having spent hours walking everywhere with the dogs. The playground was bordered on one side by the forested area, so I crept through the trees to where the path ran through, circling back towards my condo, keeping close to the shadowed area while hoping and praying that I had lost him or he had lost interest. The forested area ends basically where the backyard of my condo begins. Still hidden, I looked around the open area ahead, and I couldn't see anyone. I made a break for it and started running like hell. Up to this point, it was just like any other walk for my dogs who had happily galloped alongside me the entire time, blissfully unaware of any danger. As I left the protection of the forest, I saw the fucker jump out of a nearby group of bushes. I had a good head start on him, but I didn't know how fast the fucker was, so I just kept running, trying my best not to look back. What happened next still amazes me to this day. As I was running, the dog still at my side. Smokey, the female, all of a sudden stopped dead in her tracks. She turned around and assumed that "don't f with me, boy" stance, started snarling and growling at the guy, which stopped him dead in his tracks too. Bandit, the male, stuck right by my side like glue until we landed on my patio. I turned and looked back and almost laughed at the fucker. Smokey was still standing her ground in full-on guard dog mode, and he was standing there, looking at her, hands up, completely in the surrender position. I called Smokey to come, and she backed away slowly, barking and still growling, until she decided it was good, then turned around and ran right back to me. I kept my eyes on the guy the entire time. He didn't move a muscle until the dogs and I went back inside, which we did as soon as Smokey got there. I immediately called 911, and within minutes, the entire backyard area was swarming with cops. The cop who interviewed me said there had been numerous reports of SAs in our area, and they figured that it was likely the same guy. Unfortunately, other than tall, skinny, and wearing black, I had zero info on what he looked like. I don't know if they ever caught him or anything more about it. Once everyone was gone, I had a good, long cuddle with my wonder dogs, complete with them licking away my tears. After the adrenaline and everything wore off, the gravity of what could have happened and how damn lucky I was finally hit me. For the record, I had done lots of different modes of training with them, but never anything that involved protection. What they did was 100% instinct that I didn't even know they had in them. My two protectors, and overall, my two very good dogs. "3:30 a.m., some random Tuesday in October. I'm sleeping soundly on my couch when I'm awakened by a loud banging and screaming. Not just drunk people at 3:30 a.m. screaming, but that horrified, panic-filled, someone is f***ing dying screaming. You know it if you've ever heard it. My eyes pop open, and I immediately see a half-naked woman, covered in blood, banging on my door. Ripped button-down shirt, barely holding on, boobs barely contained within the fabric, and wearing only a set of panties beyond that. That's it. It's freaking October in New England. It's cold as hell out here. Anyway, she's banging on my door with both fists, screaming, "Help me! Help me! They're chasing me! They're going to get me!" For the most part, I'm dumb, but not completely. I'm not just going to open my door to some screaming, bloodied up psycho. I hit my alarm and let it go off for a bit, perhaps to scare off whoever was chasing her. Then I do the only humane thing that I can think to do in this situation. I let her in. I pull her into my home and close the door quickly. I answer the call from my alarm company. Yes, send the police, send an ambulance, and thank you for being real. Before this evening, I'd never had to use my alarm before, so it was nice to know that someone was actually on the other end. Now I have this lady bleeding all over my living room and crying hysterically, repeating over and over. They were animals. They were chasing me like animals. I can clearly hear that she has an accent. I'm figuring Russian or Romanian. She's speaking broken English and is scared as hell. I take her into the kitchen and enter CSI mode. I'm thinking, yeah, I got this shit. I'm gonna not contaminate evidence and make sure I keep all the bloodied rags that I used to clean her for the cops. All the while, she's still saying that she was being chased by animals and all that. She is absolutely fucked up. The side of her face is scratched. Her arms are scraped. Her legs are all bloody with scrapes like she took a good fall. Just overall fucked up and bloodied everywhere. So, scene setter. 3:30 a.m., kitchen, bloody half-naked, non-good English-speaking, hysterical, fucked up bloody woman. Me collecting evidence. Me. It's okay. Calm down, the police are on their way with an ambulance. Woman. They were chasing me like animals. Me. You're safe now. Let's just get you cleaned up. Woman. They were chasing me like animals, and they were going to get me. They were chasing me, then they turned into werewolves. Me. Thinking. Oh, fuck me. It was at this moment that it really hit me. Who did I just let into my apartment? Woman. They were chasing me and turned into werewolves right in front of my eyes. Me. Now fully scared myself. Calm down. You're safe here. I bring her back into the living room and I'm terrified. Many thoughts running through my head right then. Am I going to die tonight? Is she going to attack me? Why aren't the police here yet? I need a weapon and fast. But mostly just, oh my God, what the f*** did I do by letting her inside? She's bandaged but still rambling on and on about animals and chasing her and what have you. I decide it's probably a good idea to give 911 another ring, just to be sure they know my address. It also allows me to get my couch in between me and her, affording me just a little bit of safety. Not much, but I was confident in my run around the couch, she'll never catch me skills. She's pacing my living room, rambling, when she goes over to the window and starts staring. A good 10-second stare, with a creepy silence attached to it. Then, babies. There are babies in the road. Oh my God, look at all the babies in the road. Screaming at the top of her lungs. Now, there's no way that I'm coming out from behind the couch. Those babies in the road are probably there for a good reason. This goes on for a good 30 seconds. Not an imaginary 30 seconds where you think it's been like 5 minutes and it's really only been like 10 seconds. This was a full-on 30 seconds of screaming and me standing behind my couch thinking, no way I'm gonna fall for that trick. Finally, the police show up. The officer knocks on my door. I now have to leave the safety of the backside of my couch to unlock the door. I dashed my ass right to the door and ran out, telling the cops, she's nuts. Be careful. They take her to the ambulance and do whatever they need to do to her. At this point, I'm just chilling on my couch, shell-shocked. The cop comes back in and asks me if I know her. And while this woman looked familiar to me, I didn't know her. Then he asked me if I was babysitting for her. I'm like, huh? No, I'm not babysitting for her. The cop proceeds to say, oh, because she said you were babysitting her kids, and when she showed up to collect them, you wouldn't give them back. At this point, I'm exhausted and frog-eyed and just throw my rights right out the window, telling the cop to search my house and that there are no kids. The cop knows it's a BS story she gave, but he had to ask anyhow, and I understand that. He doesn't ultimately search my house. Ambulance takes her away, cops leave. It's now 4 a.m. and I'm sitting on my couch knowing I'm never going to get back to sleep, and the upcoming workday is going to suck. The best part of this story is what the police blotter said in the next day's paper. Resident lets woman claiming to be chased by werewolves into her home. Awesome. Just awesome. Turns out that I did know her. She was my neighbor. Yeah, great fucking neighbor I am. I arrive home that day from my suck-ass day to find DCF, the Department of Children and Families, waiting outside my door. Come on, really? I now have to let this DCF person into my home because I, being the nosy that I am, want to know what the deal is with this psycho woman. Contrary to what the police blotter said, I usually don't let people claiming to be chased by werewolves into my home. Anyhow, DCF woman informs me that psycho woman was my neighbor. I knew she looked familiar, but I just couldn't place her face. Perhaps the blood and scrapes and psychotic behavior threw me off a little bit. There does seem to be a missing child, or so the psycho woman told in the hospital. I'm starting to get a little freaked out as psycho woman already accused me of not giving back her, what I thought, were imaginary kids. The story that I got from DCF was limited. The worker wouldn't divulge much information, but in a nutshell, what I did manage to get is this. Psycho woman lives next door to me, the house to my right. We share a driveway. The house itself is a duplex, so people were always coming and going. I never paid much attention to anyone living there. Psycho woman claims she has a child, a little girl, age unknown. I think to myself, really? Although after the prior night, why am I surprised that she didn't know the age of her kid? Said child is missing. Psycho woman was under the influence of mind-altering drugs. Which, yeah, duh. She was Romanian, and that's about all that I got. The messed up thing is that I do remember seeing a child over there, a little girl, probably around the age of 4. I'd only ever seen her one time, maybe twice in the 3 years that Psycho woman had lived there. Again, I never paid too much attention to what went on over there. DCF questions me about everything from, have I seen this lady before? To why would Psycho lady choose to bang on my door? I'm not especially paranoid, but I can recognize the potential for a situation to turn ugly very quickly. I tell DCF lady that I have no clue who the fuck that woman is, why she would choose to bang on my door, or where the fuck that psycho woman's alleged child is. Pretty much exactly like that, minus the F-bombs. DCF lady assures me that they don't think that I'm involved, but that it's routine for them to follow up. DCF lady leaves. I'm pretending like I don't want anything to do with this situation, but honestly, my life is pretty boring. This is the most excitement I've had in months. Next day, 4 police cars, K9 squad, 5 to 6 uniform cops, 2 plainclothes show up at my neighbor's house. My nosy ass goes right outside. Psycho woman's door is wide open, and the fuzz is walking in and out, and the K9 unit is bringing in the dogs. The cops tell me the following story, and I swear on all that is sacred, I couldn't make this shit up. It seems that upon entering the house, they found a considerable mess waiting for them. The house itself just dirty and dingy, and all around a health hazard. The basement was wall-to-wall mattresses. The bathroom attached to the basement room was f***ing rank. Cops' exact words. It was a 2-bedroom unit, with a non-master bedroom being comprised entirely of wall-to-wall mattresses. However, the master bedroom looked to be a king's room. Again, words used by the cop. That's pretty much all I got out of them. I hung around and watched them drag all the mattresses out, which was pretty disgusting. dirty pee stains, and whatever else nastiness all over them. They took out about 3 dressers, cheap Walmart types, and miscellaneous other crap. Table, chairs, couch. Turns out, this house is a Romanian immigrant sex trafficking operation. The owner of the house is bringing these Romanian girls over, providing housing, if you can call it that, and selling them out for sex. Psycho Woman did have a kid, but she was taken away by DCF about 6 months prior. The Psycho Woman herself was, as far as they could tell, on a job, using what they think was crack or meth. She freaked out, all fucked up, and was running home when she must have fallen several times and gotten even more messed up. She, again what they think, hit the height of her paranoia upon reaching my door. And then, well, the rest is history. Moral of the story: if you don't let a crazy, bloodied, half-naked woman into your home at 3:30 a.m., you will never find out that your neighbors are running a Romanian immigrant sex trafficking operation. This story takes place when I was at home alone in my previous apartment, which was in a not-so-great neighborhood. My apartment was on the ground level, and my bedroom window faced a back alley behind the property. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people often rummaged. Just before dawn one morning, I heard a tapping at my window. My back was to the window, and my eyes were now wide open. It was still dark outside. I sleep with my lamp on, and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a slat or two, causing a 6-inch gap. So I knew that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping could see me lying in bed as plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 4 or 5 taps, so I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself that it was something, anything else, other than a person watching me and tapping on my window. But then came more tapping. Now, I was faced with the terrifying reality that someone had been watching me through my window in the dark for only God knows how long, and they decided to tap on the window to get my attention. Had one of the homeless people become aggressive during their dumpster dive? Something told me that nothing good would come from turning around and looking at the window. If he got me to look at him, what next? Remember, my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and pretending that I was too groggy to hear him. I stood up and hazily made my way out of the bedroom, as though I were going to the restroom or something. Once I was out of sight, I ran to the phone to dial 911, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear and bolt out my front door, which was out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure if I could outrun whoever it was, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I could make a decision, I heard a loud pop, the sound of my window being pried open. I thought my heart was going to jump from my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbor Mike descending his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask for his help. Mike was a big guy, and I'd heard that he was trained in martial arts of some sort. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of my apartment to see just what was going on. Within a few seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against the wall and into the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came around to my front door, telling me not to worry about seeing that guy ever again. He'd beaten him up pretty badly. I wanted to believe Mike, that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, and that he would hopefully never venture this way again. But it wasn't a homeless person. According to Mike, when the guy ran off, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car, and sped away. My neighborhood wasn't exactly a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder was likely someone who'd seen me out somewhere, and had followed me home to find out where I lived. So, Mr. Window Tapper, I still wonder what you would have done if you'd gotten inside before Mike caught you. I wonder if you still follow me. And because of that, I often find myself wishing that Mike had put an end to you. If you found out where I live now, let's never meet. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what that beeping sound was all about. For those who don't know, an Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive the notifications on your phone, then you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information, like the victim's appearance, as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, make and model of a vehicle if applicable. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room. It was an Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory I have, where I believe with all my heart that I was almost kidnapped when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was lying dormant in my subconscious, and this random Amber Alert talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. This incident is something I've pondered and thought about off and on for years now. I'm 41 years old, and a guy, by the way. It's just been a while since I've considered the factors and details of the experience, and this recent Amber Alert talk with my daughter really caused me to pause and reflect on the incident itself once again. And that's what brings me here today. As a parent, you worry about these things and do all you can to protect your children, especially when you personally experience something truly scary like this. The occurrence happened when I was just a young kid. My guess is somewhere around 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think that's a safe estimate based on the fact that much of those early childhood memories aren't there anymore. I do remember my kindergarten experience, which I would have been 5 or 6 for, and also later grades. So this incident must have happened sometime after or around the ages of 7 or 8. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town with not much to offer, so from time to time, we would go to this neighboring city about 45 minutes from where we were located. It just had more going on in the way of shopping. My parents would take me up there for school clothes shopping or out to eat because restaurants were better, and because my mom was a crafter. She absolutely loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were different craft stores, including a fabric store that she liked going to up there. This specific trip, we went to a fabric store, Joanne Fabrics to be exact. This was a pretty big store. As a little kid, I guess most every place seemed big, but no kidding, this was a sizable shop. My dad sat out in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot. When there was a store that he just didn't want to go into, he'd sit in the car, so I can't blame him there. I can't recall exactly what all my mom was looking for or trying to get in that store that day, but I do remember what section we were in, an area with a bunch of racks with various fabrics hanging. Imagine a clothing store with circular racks with clothes hanging around them. And that's pretty much what it's like at this fabric store. Racks and racks of hanging fabrics. I remember this area being slightly toward the beginning or the entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these racks, I began to wander, though not far, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started wandering around is my guess. But I could still see my mom just up and over a few racks away, so it wasn't like I was on the other side of the store or anything. When then, this random man approached me, and honestly, I can't even remember from what direction he came from. It's just like I was there by myself one minute, and the next, I looked up and saw this guy. It was like he came in fast and out of nowhere. I quickly looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a few racks up and away, but I could still see her, although there was a fair bit of distance between my mother and myself at this point. So here I am, standing behind some rack of fabric with this older guy opposite me on the other side of the rack. That's when he speaks. "Hey, little guy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me completely off guard. He asked, "Where are your folks at? Are you here all alone?" I stood still and quiet. "Why don't you come here? I got something to show you." At this point, he started advancing towards me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other way himself, as if to meet me in the middle. I was scared at this moment and became instantly aware that this man seemed dangerous and like he was doing his best to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked fast to the left, but he did the same. And I remember this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I went, he followed. But remember, there's a rack between us. God, I'm so thankful for that rack. After some back and forth movements from me and this man, I finally lock in on my mom and yell, "Mom, help!" You would have thought I screamed bloody murder. It was so loud, and it definitely got my mom's attention. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over his shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed, "Yep, that must be this kid's mother." His demeanor absolutely changes, and it's as if everything is just fun and games, and he was just messing around. And he said as much to my mom. "I was just messing around with him. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to where I was, and as we reconnected, this guy tips his hat at my mom and makes his way quickly out of the store. I explained to my mom what had just happened, that this guy was trying to get me. I was upset and shaken up. She told me I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. It was a terrifying experience for sure, and I'm thankful something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things, like maybe this guy was really just messing around? I very much think there were nefarious intentions though. Why would a random older guy be perusing a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts or fabrics, why promptly leave when confronted? I truly believe he was up to no good. While I can't confirm such a thing, I'm glad to have never had to find out. It's been about a year since my last post here. I visit the site every now and then to read other people's stories, but haven't had much interest in contributing any of my own. The stories that I did share were mainly for entertainment. What I mean by that is, I could recount those events with ease because they virtually meant nothing to me. Just interesting stories to tell. However, what I'm about to share is not something that many of my closest friends or family even know about. The events that happened to me were traumatic, the effects of which have cemented in the way that I think, view people, and my ability to trust, or lack thereof. I'm afraid to admit this is not a story in which I showed immense courage or resilience. No, I buried these memories deep until recently. This is a messed up encounter story that is about a truly sick man, the kind that you hear about on TV or podcasts. The kind of evil man who managed to build something of himself, despite his unnatural desires, only to use his wealth and resources to further manipulate and take advantage of kids. Little background here. I grew up in a very poor part of New England, a Hispanic-dominated area. The city itself is pretty small and has always been a bit of a conundrum to me. The city is known for its drug use and violence, although it was once a prospering mill city, one where immigrants came to work and secure their own slice of the American dream. The city and many of its residents have since disintegrated like the stones that make up the massive factories that loom over the city. The conundrum I speak of is while the city remains open to high criminal activity, the surrounding towns are doing great. Less than 10 miles north, you enter New Hampshire, where things are generally quiet, and south you will pass through multiple rich and thriving towns. The man I will introduce later would come down from New Hampshire to prey on the poor kids from my community. I was maybe 13 years old. It was definitely summertime because I remember the heat. It was a fun summer. My friends and I were outside all the time, and while none of us had a car, we made the most of walking where we needed to go. I was a bit younger than the guys I was hanging out with at the time, so they were always able to stay out later than me. Funny how everything that happens while you're not there feels like you've missed out on the best stuff. One day, while we were all just hanging around, a friend of mine mentions, maybe we can get Ryan to come by and buy us some food. Always feeling left out, I acted as if I knew who Ryan was, the whole time thinking he was a teenager, perhaps someone in his early 20s. I let the conversation go on for a bit before I couldn't resist and asked, "Who's Ryan?" The response I got drove me crazy because it only furthered my frustration of not totally feeling like I was a part of the gang. "You don't know who Ryan is? We've been working with him for a few weeks now. He owns a junkyard, and we go and strip cars, log spare parts, and just fuck around. We get him to buy us stuff, and he lets us drive his cars." I thought, how could this be? I felt so embarrassed and betrayed. All my friends apparently had a job and were going out to eat and driving cars, and I was just finding out about it. Wanting to fit in, I urged them to get me a job too. My friend Eli, a leading figure in our group, pulls out his cell phone and gives this Ryan guy a call. The way Eli was talking to him made it seem like Eli was in control, like he was bullying Ryan. He spoke to him aggressively and told him we were hungry and for him to come pick us up and buy us food. Ryan agreed. Shortly after, the man pulls up in his red pickup with a tow in the back and his company logo on the side of the truck. He was a white guy, mid-40s, short and chubby. He had a high-pitched voice that screeched out when he would laugh. When he arrived, he immediately turned to Eli and started talking shit to him, making fun of him, letting out that weird laugh. It strangely made me feel at ease. It wasn't the way I expected an adult to act. It was like he was one of us, and you were in if you were cool with him. Eli introduced me to him and told him that I wanted to work. Ryan examined me and asked if I knew anything about cars. I told him I did, and he agreed we'd talk about it over lunch. He told us all to jump into his truck and asked me to sit in the front seat so that we could talk. I remember that drive like it was yesterday. We were listening to the radio. Pat Benatar's "I Love Rock and Roll" was playing. I could see that he was singing under his breath, so I purposely started singing the sound out loud, acting as if I didn't know he was also singing. He noticed and turned the music up, looked at me, and started singing loudly. We did this the whole ride until arriving at an Italian place. The food was amazing. I had only ever really been out to eat a handful of times, and none of them were with my friends, ordering whatever we wanted and goofing off the whole time. It was a real treat, and only made me want to be in with Ryan even more. It was clear he played favorites, and those who he liked received more gifts. At the end of lunch, he agreed to give me a job and made Eli agree to let me know the next time we had work. The next month or so felt like I was having the best summer of my life. Ryan owned a junkyard in New Hampshire and also had a car rental service. He was expanding his business, so there was a ton of construction going on. His office was in a construction trailer outside the yard. This is where you would find him if you needed anything. He would pick us up in the morning and bring us to the yard. For 8 hours, we would all fuck around, walk to the very end of the yard, and hide out in the cars. We would take naps and scavenge through the hundreds of cars hoping to find valuables. Occasionally, we would actually have to work, but even then, we would still mess around. All the while, we were getting paid. Not a ton in retrospect, but more than any of us had ever received at that point. More than the pay, what we all really wanted was a car. He easily had 30 of them, not including the cars he rented. Each car was in fair shape, and each day he would throw Eli a different set of keys, and it really made the rest of us jealous. You see, Ryan didn't care if you had a license. Eli didn't, and he drove a different car every day. I had my eye on a Mazda sedan. I wanted the car so badly. When I approached Ryan, I nearly begged him for it. He agreed we would talk about it at the end of the day. I spent the whole day imagining my life with that car, how cool I would look, pulling up to places, getting girls' attention. A car at that time was like entering into a new world, and I just might have one at the end of the day. The end of the day came, and he threw Eli some keys and told him to bring everyone home, except for me. This wasn't alarming to anyone, because all I could talk about the whole day was how he was going to give me that car. After everyone left and the sun began to set, Ryan asked me to talk in the trailer. He started with how kids are always coming and going, trying to take advantage of him, stealing from him, explaining how ungrateful people are to his generosity. I strangely felt like he was speaking about me, but indirectly. He asked me a lot of questions about drug use. Are you on drugs? Have you ever taken any? How do I know I can trust you? How do I know if you will pay me back and not just ruin my car and never give me a dime? My response to all of it was no, and I would thoroughly work off what I owed for the car. He then asked if I had anything in my pockets. I said no, and willingly turned them out. Ryan said, "You really think I'm stupid? Like you would hide stuff in your pockets? I know you're hiding things in your clothes." I had no warning bells ringing because a lot of what he was saying was true. We all stole from him. Whatever we could, whenever we could get away with it. We all thought we were in control and using him. It's amazing how someone can get you to do something and to do it on your own accord, to feel like it was your own idea. No matter what I said, he kept repeating, "I know you have something. I know you do." Ensuring him that I didn't, I would move my shirt around and pull on my waistband. But it wasn't taking. He just kept repeating that he doesn't make deals with thieves. Then I got the idea, painfully in retrospect. I'll take my shirt off, show this guy that I don't have anything. Standing there with my shirt off, he just continued. So I then took my pants off. I stood there in triumph, thinking, "You see, I don't have anything." With only my boxers on, I started to jokingly dance because I had won. I didn't have anything. When Ryan said calmly and coldly, "Take off your boxers." What? I was so confused. I didn't have anything. And why doesn't he believe me? Ryan just sat behind his desk and told me again to take off my boxers. I was frozen. Even though I hadn't said the words, I knew I was alone, far away from home, and confusion just took over my mind. Thoughts in my head ceased to exist. I was just frozen. He leaned forward and said, "Are you going to make me go over there and take them off for you?" Weird how I still didn't think I was being taken advantage of. My brain still thought, this fucking guy really thinks I stole something. What the fuck could I hide in my boxers? I said to him again, I didn't have anything. And well, he completely dropped the whole stealing bit. "I want to see your dick. Pull it out." I didn't know what to do. It really sucks you don't have any options to just freeze time, to actually think about what is happening. Instead, you're forced to make a choice as fast as you would choose the words while having a conversation. My brain went into survival mode, and that mode was not to look at the situation for what it actually was. And I did what he asked, choosing to believe that it just wasn't a big deal. He just sat there and looked at me, and thank God that that's all he did. I began to shake, and that's when I grabbed my clothes. He snapped out of whatever world he was in and started moving things around on his desk, looking in drawers. I couldn't meet his eyes. I was ashamed and confused. He eventually spoke and said something like, "Don't crash it," as he threw me the keys to the Mazda. I caught the keys and left, trying really fucking hard not to think about what had just happened. I didn't want to face it. That's why when I got home, I chose not to say anything. My father, who I am sure would have killed Ryan, I was embarrassed to try to tell him anything, knowing he would think, why did you do that? Why didn't you fight? I raised you to be tough. Why would you do that? Nope. I just showed up like any other night. Except this time, I had a car. I clearly didn't think things through because I was like 14, and I just came home with a car. My parents were pissed. They told me to call one of my friends and have them pick up the car. They also said I couldn't work there anymore, and I truly wasn't upset. The next day, I told Eli I was quitting and asked if he could pick up my last pay. He tried to convince me not to quit, but I stuck to what my parents had said, being adamant about quitting. Eli would eventually call me a few days later and tell me Ryan wouldn't give him what he owed me. Instead, I had to get it myself. I never tried to get that money. I knew I couldn't face him. Fast forward a few months, I was with some of the guys, and my friend Joe said something. Did Ryan ever ask you guys to show him your dick? To my surprise, everyone said yes, but they all said that they didn't do it. I lied to them all and made up some story where I freaked out and threatened him. Over the years, I found out all the kids did it. There were 8 of us. One kid did it with his mom waiting outside in the car to pick him up. Not sure if Ryan knew she was outside, but the kid never said a word. We all just buried it. We were tough guys, or wanted to be, and no one wanted to remember that. Fast forward again, maybe 7 or 8 years. I was 22 or 23, and a newer friend of mine who was struggling to get work tells me he landed a job at a junkyard in New Hampshire. Except the guy who owns it asked him to get naked in exchange for the job. My mind almost exploded at that moment. By that point, I had grappled a bit with it and developed anger. I completely freaked out. Asked my friend to tell me everything. He said the guy's known to pick people up for work, and after a couple of days of working with him, he invited my friend into his trailer and basically did the same thing that he did to me. What disappointed me was my friend who was in his 20s just did it. Even now I understand the craziness of the request and how he's able to get you to do it, but I so badly wish my friend acted the way that I wish that I did, knocking his fucking teeth down his throat. What's even crazier is while he was telling me this, a girlfriend we both had overheard him and says, "Are you guys talking about creepy Ryan?" Again, my mind is almost obliterated. She tells us he's gotten multiple people over the years and just can't be touched. That people have tried, but he does tow work for the city and PD of that town and has since made connections. Now, I don't know the details of these reportings, whether or not investigations were underway, but people told the truth, and he was still out there doing whatever he wanted. While hearing he was still out there was shocking, my thoughts on him ended with that drunk conversation. But I'm going to fast forward another 3 or 4 years. I was about 25 or so. I was out after a night of bar hopping. A couple and I decided to get chicken at a late night spot that everyone goes to after the bars close. While there, I was approached by a guy who recognized me, and I didn't recognize him at first, but then realized that it was an old friend of mine, Brandon. We were friends during our teenage years, and we both worked for Ryan. Last I had heard, Brandon had a bad heroin addiction, and the rumors were certainly true because I could barely recognize him. He was happy to see me and asked if I could spare a few bucks or a cigarette, then asked if I could give him a ride to where he was staying. Brandon said he was abandoned and needed to get back up to his friends in New Hampshire. I really didn't want to take him, but he was insistent and wouldn't stop asking despite my body language and what I'm assuming was a distasteful look on my face. Eventually, I agreed. I needed to get my car, so I took his number down and told him I would call when I was outside. He didn't believe me and kept begging that I wouldn't ditch him. Looking back though, I wish I had. While we were driving, I was contemplating how Brandon was going to kill me, trying to stay alert just in case he tried anything crazy. I was aggravated because I didn't want to do this, and realizing more and more that we were never friends in the first place. I barely knew him years ago. He was practically a stranger. On the road, he tells me to take a left, and I get a weird, familiar sense of where we are. And that's when I ask, "Where are your friends?" Brandon replies, "Did you ever meet Ryan?" Like every time I heard that fucker's name, my mind blew up. I shouted, "You're staying with Ryan? That guy's a fucking piece of shit pedophile who takes advantage of kids. What the fuck are you doing here?" I assumed that fucker was in prison. Brandon just laughed and said, "Yeah, I work with him. He's weird, but you just need to smack him up a bit, and he doesn't try that weird shit on you." I was pissed and kept trying to explain to Brandon how fucking severe this guy was and how it wasn't a small issue. Brandon just kept shrugging it off though and said many people had paid him visits and put him in the hospital a few times, and something about him being kidnapped and having to pay money to families threatening to kill him. He also said the cops had paid him multiple visits, and there was a charge against him, but he had paid fees and maybe on some registry, but he still has everything he had before. None of that was satisfying to hear. I wanted to hear that he was rotting in prison or dead. I refused to drive him all the way there and dropped him off at the top of the street. I said good luck and sped the fuck out of there. I was so fucking angry the entire drive home. He was still out and walking around. I passed out when I finally got home and slept in late the next morning. When I woke up, I had a missed call and a voicemail. I listened, and it was Ryan. I'm assuming Brandon told him that I gave him a ride, and perhaps the things that I said. He said that I needed to call him back so we could talk, that Brandon was in bad health, and he needed to talk to me. I was shocked and terrified. Hearing his voice seriously gave me chills. It was like I was 14 all over again. I paced around my apartment and decided to call back. When I got Ryan on the phone, I absolutely lost it. I screamed at him, calling him a pedophile, and told him that I was going to kill him. I reminded him of what he did, all while swearing and describing how I wanted him dead. He eventually hung up on me, and I immediately blocked the number and started mentally preparing myself. I thought I had just started war and told myself I needed to get ready for him to come. The sick fuck would try and kill me because I wanted to expose him. But no one ever came. My paranoia eventually went away. I would go on to move a couple of years later and can say that I haven't heard his name again, and I pray that I never do. Please, people who hear this, if you have kids, watch out for them. There are real psychos out there, and even though you think you're well put together, things can happen to you, or the ones that you know and love. I was ashamed for a long time for not coming forward and doing all that I could to stop the prick. It was just easiest to bury it deep and act as if it never happened. That unfortunately comes with consequences. It changes you. I don't trust anyone, and I make up the worst intentions for people. I will never forgive him, and I truthfully couldn't care less if he died a painful death. I've done my best to grow from this and have moved on, but it does sting more than a little, knowing that he never faced the punishment that he so rightfully deserves. Years ago, when I was pregnant with my first child, my husband and I had just settled in for the night. With all the preparations, tidying, and readying for the baby to be here, we were up late. And by the time that each of us was ready to hit the hay, it couldn't have been earlier than 1:30 a.m. I had just tossed the comforter to the side, ready to wobble my way into my body pillow pregnancy cocoon, when I hear our doorbell ring. My husband walks from our bedroom to the front door, peers out the tiny slit between our curtains and the window, and sees a woman standing out on our porch. He unlocks our wooden door and opens it. Mind you that our security door that is metal never opens up at any point in this interaction, which is the reason why I think hubby felt so comfortable to open the door at that time anyway. Even before saying hello, it was clear that the woman was high and jittery. She looked around nervously before finally asking if she could use our bathroom. Hubby says no and dismissively tells her that this isn't a public restroom. Upon hearing this, the woman was not happy with the response and began pulling and kicking at our security door. Even before her lash out, we both had an awful feeling about this woman and knew that something here just wasn't right. As she pulled and rattled at the handle of our door, I took great pride in the fact that we are a family that religiously locks all doors to our home the moment that we're inside. No reason to ever leave anything to chance, is my opinion. My husband tells her that she needs to go and close the wooden door right in her face. But she continued to bang and scream outside of our house, yelling about how she needed to use the bathroom. After a minute or two of this, my husband reopens the door and tells her to piss off, or else he's calling the cops. When she hears this, she stopped cold, froze, and for about 20 seconds, just stood on our porch and stared at us, before quietly turning around and walking off. A little put off by how she calmed down so quickly and left, we turned off all the lights and again turned to that small opening between our curtains and the window to see where she went. Just outside the frame of what we could easily see from the window, we think we saw her next door, speaking with 2 other people. I said to my husband there and then that that was the setup for a home invasion. He quickly agreed. The thing was, I'd actually seen this woman around our neighborhood before, and quite a few times at that. I believe that she had seen me too, and it's likely that she knew I was heavily pregnant. I'm thinking that in her mind, that is what may have made us good targets, thinking that if they were able to make it inside, that we would be more compliant. People have a tendency to be that way when they're attempting to protect their family. If I had to guess, I bet she followed me home. Not that I ever got the chance to ask, because I never saw her again after that night. Not even that it needs to be said here, but remember to lock your doors. Don't ever give anyone a chance to get inside. If you stay ready, you'll never have to get ready. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village. And as I was in between jobs at that point, I picked up a job at a local garden center. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take coffee breaks frequently and wear basically whatever I liked, as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house, and full of people of all ages, who were the most lovely people that I had ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden center were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free teas and discounted lunches for seniors if they had a store card. So you often got to know all of them, and some of them we even gave nicknames. Most of them sweet, like Pink Hair Lady, a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was Camper Van Couple, who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. With Creepy Artist Man, though, he gave most of the young girls weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, and had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with naked women on them, or Professional Patrol sort of slogans on the back. He always wore ripped jeans, where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint or mud or something. He had this strange half smile that would never leave his face, and a kind of leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there, especially the younger ones. Anyway, it was a roasting hot summer's day, and I had gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo, as well as my tool belt to prune and deadhead plants as I went. With the hose in my hand and sun on my face, I was busy, but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden center. Well, hello there. Out of practically nowhere, he slipped out behind some wooden trellises and looked me up and down, smiling with his weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs. Me. Okay, sir. Have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything. I turned to continue my job. Him. I've never seen you here before. You're the new one. Me. Huh? Well, I've been here about 8 months now, so I don't think I'm new. Him. I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started. You have a nice tan. You look young. Me. Thanks. I'm 23. Anyway, I have to get back to work. Him. Well, nice to meet you. Before casually stating my entire name. Hearing him say my name slightly irked me, and that's when I suddenly remembered my name badge and get more slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area where the tool shed was, with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, creepy artist guy had left. As the weeks went by, he would come into the store pretty regularly, usually mid-afternoon. Coincidentally, or so I thought, around the time that I'd start my shift. Most of the time, I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the smallest, most pointless things, like floristry wire or a tiny bag of birdseed. It seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance, statements mostly like, "You have your hair different today. Yesterday you had it down. You have new glasses." Or, "That's a different lip color than yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction. I felt uncomfortable, but I did my best to politely shrug it off. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the forest of them at the back of the store. He jumped out from behind one, and it made me jump. To which I was kind of pissed, because I dropped a glass ornament, and it had smashed. He bent down as well and tried to help by grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if there was anything I could help him with. That's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me that he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening at the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter, and he thought that I would like his work, which was strange because I had never indicated I was interested in art to him or anyone else for that matter. I asked him if he wanted me to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out, touched my arm, and said, "No, the invitation is specifically for you." He pointed his finger and jammed it right into my breast when he said, "You." So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me. I cringed away and said that I was busy with my boyfriend that day. Sorry. and kind of scampered off. I remember feeling really strange after that. The fact he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they told me they would warn me the next time he was in the store, so I could maybe hang out in the storeroom until he was gone. Well, that memo must have missed a few of the temp Christmas staff, because one day I get told by one, "Your friend is asking for you at the tills." It wasn't unusual for my friends to stop by, as it was fairly popular for gifts, etc. So I was thinking that maybe it was my ex's mom or something like that. So I head to the till, and there he is. He's holding a piece of paper in his hand. I cringed, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and asked what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes, watering the hanging baskets in a rather sexually geared kind of position. I kind of stood there and said thank you, but I couldn't keep it, as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers, however weird they may be. I handed it back to him, and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He then turned around and walked out of the garden center without another word. By this point, I had had enough. I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that just happened, including all the previous interactions that I had had with that man over the past year. My manager watched the CCTV and agreed that it was so strange the way he gave me this grotesque picture, and told me that he would talk to the man if he ever came back in. My manager praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing, and that he would try to see him off the next time. The next day was a Sunday, and I wasn't due to work. My boss calls me and tells me he just received a call from headquarters stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming on to a customer. The staff member they had described and named was me. The caller had said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to have sex with him, had led him on, and was obviously promiscuous. That I had been pursuing him for over a year. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had had, and ranted loudly about how I'd been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ didn't believe a word, as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggest I report it to the police. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke to said that man matched the description of a guy who was a local pest, somebody who would often harass young girls in the local area. He was also known to stalk girls in his car and had attempted to abduct a young girl 4 years ago. The police officers assured me that they would file a report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden center or anywhere near me again. And if he were to show up again, that I was to call the police and he would be promptly arrested. Unfortunately though, it didn't stop him from sending a ranting letter to my workplace addressed to me, saying that he would off himself if I didn't take him back and receive his gift that he drew for me. Fortunately, the police saw this as an unsolicited form of contact, and that man was thankfully arrested. So, one more time, creepy artist guy, let's not meet ever again. Being that the story is over a decade old now, I no longer live in the area and don't work at that garden center. So suffice it to say, unless something were to go terribly wrong, I won't be meeting creepy artist guy ever again. This happened a few years back when I was around 20 or so. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt at my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, when he mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother. She now lives across the street from me, and he thought that it would be a swell idea if we met, because apparently we are very similar, and I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life. He rings her cell and tells her to drop by my place. She arrived at my apartment, and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, so maybe 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that were much older for some reason. We played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt eventually decided to go home, leaving us two alone. We chilled for a while longer, ended up making out, and I got all of her contact info before she told me she's going home and that we should meet up again soon. Over the next few weeks, we developed a strong relationship and hang out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and walk across the street, and we'd get wasted and watch movies. It was actually pretty awesome. After arriving home from a 10-day trip to New York City, things started to get really weird. The day I returned, she asked if she could come by, so I unpacked my stuff and told her to stop in. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking nonstop about all of the awesome things I did and people I met in New York City, and I could immediately tell that she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she just flat out said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a f." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily that I had been getting to know was not like this at all. She was caring and passionate and an amazing person, or so I thought. Fast forward a few nights later, I had just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift, and I collapse in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 10 p.m., and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at the moment. I'm too exhausted, and our last hangout was a little too weird for me to comprehend, so I'm still trying to decide how to deal with that. I plug my phone in to charge, turn the lights off, and fall asleep effortlessly. I wake up to someone pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs. "Open the fucking door. Let me in. Now." My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke. I grab my phone from beside my bed, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles per hour. 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily. I scan through the text while she's still at the door screaming, trying to break my door down. The most recent text from her is a long one, claiming that I'm a piece of shit for not responding to her text earlier, and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. She had a key to the building still, from when she used to live there. I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack, and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door and calm her? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door. She instantly begins wailing on me, swinging her arms around, trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette, and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. She was obviously on some sort of drug. She kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text, slurring her speech, and losing her balance in the process. I was somehow able to calm her down, and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice little enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another. She was quiet now. Finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole, and that I needed to explain myself to her. The look in her eyes was pure evil, and she spoke to me in a calm demeanor now. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I get her home and return to my apartment to attempt sleeping, at which I don't succeed. A couple of days later, I return home from work, and there's an envelope taped to my door. I open it, and it's a handwritten letter from Emily, apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a literal candy bar attached to the envelope, one that I had never heard of. She always told me that I needed to try. I never spoke to her again. From what Matt tells me, which, by the way, he always knew that she was a problematic person. She is a heavy user of crack now, and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. Emily, let's not meet again, for the love of God. This takes place almost 30 years ago, in July of 1996. I had just finished my term of service for the Army. I had been stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and decided at midnight that I would out-process and travel back to Wisconsin. All day, I was so anxious to go that I had trouble sleeping. Finally, at 11:45, I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Of course, knowing people wanted to sign out right at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't leave until you get your final sign-off with the sergeant and turn in your room key. So I waited, and finally, at 2:45, he returned. I turned my key in, got the sign-off, and at around 3:30 a.m., I was on my way. At first, I was so full of adrenaline that I felt like I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline didn't last long, and by the time I was getting through Dallas, I was beginning to nod off behind the wheel. I decided that just past Denton, that I would pull over at the next rest stop and take a quick nap until the sun came up. I could barely keep my eyes open when I came up to a stop. I pulled over and got out of my car to get some air and throw something away, and also just to get a look at my surroundings. There were only about 3 other cars and 2 semi-trucks there. It was actually a picnic stop and not a rest stop, so there were no restrooms. I threw my trash away and glanced at a poster of a few missing people, but I really didn't pay any attention to it. I quickly went back to my car, which was a basic Geo Metro. No radio, no power windows, no power locks. I cracked the windows and turned on the boombox that I rode around with for some tunes and laid down to get some sleep. I was only asleep maybe 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car gently shake. I cracked an eye open and looked around, didn't see anything, so I blew it off and went back to sleep. I then heard what sounded like my door handle being pulled and scratching right around where the key would go in. I then sat up quickly, but once again, I didn't see anyone or anything. I investigated all my windows just to be sure. Once again, I shrugged it off as me being tired and laid back down, simply turning up the radio. Being a Texas night in July, it was hot, but I was so tired that I laid back down. A few more minutes pass, and I heard the door handle again, and this time, the car really shook. I sat up straight and saw a man standing at the passenger side looking in. Even though it was hot and humid, he was wearing a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and I couldn't make out his face. Being young and dumb and just out of the military, I yelled at him, "What the f*** do you want?" He just stared at me, so, like an idiot, I got out of the car. Mind you, I'm not a big dude. I'm only about 5 feet 6 inches tall, but I was pissed. This man just walked off towards the picnic tables, as if nothing had happened. All the while I'm yelling at him that if he came back, that I would take him out. I decided then that I would just drive on from there. I got back in my car and went on my way. Even though I was so upset, only about 10 miles down the road, I was once again super tired. Luckily, another 10 miles down the I-35, there was another picnic stop. Not sure why North Texas doesn't have rest areas, but they don't. I pulled into the second stop and backed into a spot just in case I needed to leave quickly. Not sure why, but there was only one other car and no semi-trucks in this lot. I again locked my doors, cracked the windows, and turned up my boombox. I fell asleep right away, and about 30 minutes later, I hear a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jumped up and looked around, and no one was there. I got out of the car again, which I know was stupid, but I had my macho military attitude going. I didn't see anyone around. I assumed that it was my nerves from the other stop, so I got back into my car, locked the doors again, and closed my eyes tight. This time though, I was too amped up to fall asleep, so I laid there with eyes closed, and I felt as if someone was looking at me. And when I opened my eyes this time, I saw the guy standing there again. Red sweatshirt, hood up. I couldn't see his eyes or many other facial features, but from the light there was, I could see that he was smiling at me. I popped up quick and tried to quickly open the door and bump him away, but being a cheap geo, since the doors were locked, it didn't open right away. The man walked backwards, still staring right at me, and by the time I composed myself and got out of the car, he was about 30 feet away, still facing me. I remember it being pretty dark, but as I looked him over, he looked real skinny and tall, maybe 6'3", 6'4". But I still felt like I could take him with all of my military experience. He was wearing the red hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and green tennis shoes. For some reason, I thought the shoes looked odd. They stood out. I could see something glint in the light every now and then as he stood there staring at me. I didn't know then, but today, I believe that it was a machete. I quickly reached into my back seat and grabbed my baseball bat. I began yelling at him to come get some. Not sure why I said that. He started walking towards me, and I took a few steps towards him, not really thinking, solely on autopilot. As I got about 5 feet from my car, and he was now about 15 feet from me, a yellow van pulled up real quick and parked just off to the side of my car. It was then that I finally realized what was really happening, and I saw two guys, also wearing hooded sweatshirts, in the van. Before they could get out, I ran back to my car. I left the keys in the ignition. Since I had backed in, I was able to cut the wheel hard right and peeled my car right out of there. I was so lucky that my car, being a manual, didn't stall because the other guys were out of the van and the first one was just about at my car. I jumped back on the interstate and didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. I eventually stopped for gas and to use the restroom. In the restroom, I noticed that same flyer that I barely glanced at the first picnic stop. It was basically a flyer with several missing people on it, warning others not to stop for long periods of time at the rest areas. It described a possible suspect as being 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green tennis shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. I couldn't see myself, but I know that all of the color drained from my face immediately. Needless to say that since it was now daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin wide awake. Not sure why, but I never reported it to the number on the flyer or told anyone else about it before sharing this story here. But I now live in North Texas and pass those two picnic stops every day on my way to work, and I think about this quite often. I wonder if those people got anyone else, or if the authorities caught up with them. I tried looking it up, but I never found any stories about it on the internet. And now, I'm just left wondering. A few years ago, I, a woman, lived in my car. I was fresh out of college and overwhelmed with student debt. And being young, dumb, and 21, I thought car living was a good way to save money. I live in Southern California, so the rent is high, and the weather is temperate enough to make this possible year-round. One night, I decided to park in a neighborhood that I thought I knew well. It was right by the beach and a couple blocks from an ex-boyfriend's of mine, so I felt safe there, as I had walked the streets at night plenty of times. I parked, locked the doors, hung up the curtains so no one could look in, plugged in my earplugs so the cars passing wouldn't wake me, and drifted off to sleep. Now, my earplugs were effective, but they were shitty, and I could always count on them falling out in the middle of the night. I actually preferred this because it meant I could fall asleep, but still hear my phone alarm in the morning. It was about 2 a.m. when I woke up to my earplugs already having fallen out, and something feeling very wrong. odd scratching noises were coming from the window. It started at the passenger side door, then moved to the back seat doors. I froze, unsure of what to make of it, painfully aware that I leave my windows slightly cracked at night for ventilation. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I stayed frozen, just trying to make sense of it all. That's when the flashlight turned on, and some fucker unmistakably shone his light in, trying to find a crack in the curtains. And to my horror, he found one, and shone the light right where my face was. It's hard to explain, but the position of my head made it so I could piece together what was happening based on the light everywhere, but he couldn't see my eyes. Then the scratching continued. I knew I was fucked. This went from potential attempted car theft to someone knowing that I was in the car. I'll give you a little more detail for clarity. I had up these psychedelic curtains at the time, very eye-catching and hard to miss. In retrospect, it was stupid, I know. I got black curtains immediately after this incident. This is why I suspect he knew I was in the car the whole time. He just put two and two together. Also, I don't know for sure, but the scratching noises sounded like he was trying to shove something in the cracks of my window in an attempt to grab my door lock, but failing to gain any traction because they were barely cracked. During this time, I slept with a bat and mace in my car, but I was literally paralyzed with fear and couldn't will myself to grab them. However, my last year of college, I took a class called RAD, which stood for Rape Aggression Defense, and remembered the #1 rule: yell confidently and confrontationally at the assailant. I wish I could say I screamed something badass, but what left my lips was a loud, aggravated, and forceful, "Excuse me?" Like I was Link yelling at the Princess of Hyrule. It was super lame, I know, but it echoed. To my immense relief, I hear the sounds of his footsteps running away at top speed. But the most unsettling part, and I kid you not, is that I heard the asshole laughing as he ran away, almost as if this was some stupid game. I was still paralyzed, but eventually him running away gave me the courage to get up, grab my bat, and shove my way to the front seat, where I started the car and sped off. I didn't see whoever that was, and I spent that night at a friend's house. I quickly realized that car life was not for me, and I live in an apartment now. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized I had parked a single block away from a bar, and at the time of this incident, the bar had just closed. My best guess is that this someone had left the bar after getting plastered, and on their walk to wherever they were going, got the harebrained idea to mess with my car, and by proxy, mess with me. I think that thought is putting it at its most benign. If the intentions were much more nefarious, I don't even want to venture down that thought path. I'm just glad that for as creepy as they weren't very skilled at making their way into my car. Had I remained quiet, I have no doubt that they would have continued their efforts, and however dorky my exclamation was, it did the trick, and I'm tremendously thankful for that. This is no doubt one of the scariest encounters I've ever had, and even more so, I was never able to find out who it was. A few years ago, I had moved into a new apartment building closer to my family. There were only 6 units to this building, 3 on each side, each stacked on top of each other with the main door to the building set in the very middle and the interior staircase splitting each set of the apartments. The second and third floor apartments each had their own little balconies, with the second floor apartments' balconies being close enough to the ground that you could probably jump off without hurting yourself. As a forgetful and clumsy person, as soon as I noticed this, I thought to myself, awesome. If I ever accidentally lock the sliding glass door behind me, I can easily hop down and go pick my second set of keys up from my mom. I say all of this because I lived in one of those second floor apartments, and I should have been more concerned about how easy it would be for someone to climb up, rather than how easy I could potentially get down. My first few months go great. I like my neighbors, and my landlord is super chill too. I start dating a guy who lives in the same neighborhood, and soon enough, he starts spending the night frequently. At this point, it's October, and the weather is finally cooling off. I turn off my AC and open all my windows and blinds. I'm on the second floor, and no one could possibly see in, right? As it goes in the honeymoon stage, my new boyfriend and I are having sex. A lot. We christened just about every room in my apartment, more than once. We were both kind of loud at times, but the walls in this complex are thick, and we never hear my neighbors, not even them walking or vacuuming, so we never bother to try to quiet down. During the third week of October, we're cooking dinner in the kitchen, which was next to the living room where the front door was, when we hear a knock on the front door. No one was supposed to be coming over, and the apartment across the hall from me constantly had people in and out who occasionally knocked on my door by mistake, so we just assume that's what's happening and make no move to check. We pause what we're doing and wait for another knock, but nothing comes. A few minutes go by with no other knocking, so we continue to cook. I faintly hear what sounds like metal hitting metal. I hush my boyfriend and we both pause again, listening intently. Softly, the doorknob rattles, like someone's trying to open it. It rattles again, and then I hear that metal on metal scratching once more. I look at my boyfriend and his eyes are wide when he whispers at me, "Someone's trying to pick your lock." Me being young, impulsive, and somewhat naive at the time, instantly thinks, nah, no way. This is definitely someone trying to get into the wrong apartment. Without a second thought, I start crossing the room to open the door and give whoever this poor person is directions to whoever they're trying to get to. My boyfriend runs after me, grabs my arm just a second before I unlock the door, and yells, "What the fuck are you doing?" I'm about to yell back at him for not being neighborly, when the next thing I hear is heavy footsteps flying down the hallway stairs and the front door bar latch slamming open. Uh-oh. I'm thinking at this point, maybe he was right. We open the door a few moments later, and there's no one there. My boyfriend inspects my door, only to find imprints of what look like the flat edge of a screwdriver in the wood of my door. We decide whoever was here tried to use a screwdriver to jimmy the lock, but couldn't, and they ran when they heard my boyfriend yell. At this point, I'm more irritated and indignant than scared. I call my landlord and ask if there are cameras in the hallway. He says no, there aren't. I tell him what happened, and he says that he's sure it's someone else's guest just trying to get into the wrong apartment, and for me not to worry. He even says he's pretty sure those marks on my door were there before I moved in. Now I feel stupid and irrational, so I thank him and decide to try to just forget about it. I still felt a bit paranoid though, so instead of leaving my balcony door open with just the screen like I usually did at night when I was home, I started keeping it shut and locked. About a week later, my boyfriend and I are laying in bed together at night while we watch a movie. The windows in my bedroom are open to let in the night air, and we're both starting to nod off. When suddenly, I hear what sounds like a moan right outside my window, which was pretty bizarre seeing as I'm on the second floor, and the only thing below my window were some trees and overgrown weeds on a steep hillside. I brush it off, thinking it must have just been a weird noise carried on the wind, when soon after, I very clearly hear my boyfriend say, "Oh, fuck." But as I look over at him, he's sleeping. I quickly wake him up and whisper for him to listen. His eyes slowly unglaze from sleep, and I see it in his face as he comes to the same realization I did. Someone is playing a very loud, very long recording of us having sex outside my window. We both walk over and try to look outside, but can't see anything in the pitch darkness. My boyfriend gets pissed and starts yelling out the window. "F you, you little bitch. Come here, you sick f***. I'll beat the shit out of you right now." Suddenly, the recording stops and is instead replaced with the f***ing creepiest, most evil male laugh I have ever heard in my life. It was kind of the sadistic laugh that instantly makes your stomach drop, like you're on a roller coaster, and your anxiety creep up and sit on the back of your neck. My boyfriend wanted to go outside to try and confront whoever this guy was, but I begged him to just stay inside with me. I had a gut feeling that whoever was out there would take just as much, if not more pleasure, from hurting one of us than he did from recording us when we didn't know. I was so freaked out that I moved shortly thereafter. Thankfully, as I said at the start, my landlord was super chill and didn't even charge me for breaking my lease when I gave him the most sanitized version of what had happened. After I handed him the keys, he thanked me for being an almost model tenant. This surprised me because, to my knowledge, I'd never done anything that would make him upset or bother my neighbors, so I asked him what he meant. He laughed and said, "You were always so quiet and respectful. It was your one friend that I couldn't stand." The building manager had to yell at him twice for going in through the balcony rather than the front door. For reference, the building manager lived in the apartment directly below mine on the first floor. My blood instantly ran cold. I have never, ever had anyone enter my apartment by climbing up my damn balcony. I pressed further, and he didn't have too much more information. Just that some guy had been seen trying to enter my apartment by climbing up the balcony and going through the sliding door, and when questioned, had laughed it off and said that I'd invited him over and told him to come in that way. Our building was secure, so the front door automatically locked and couldn't be opened without a key. The only explanation I have is that this guy was watching us and had tried to break in more than once. Who knows how many times he had stood below my open windows and recorded the sounds of us having sex. My only consolation was that my windows were high enough that he couldn't have videotaped us without using a ladder, and I'm hoping we would have noticed that at least. I did report it to the police, but they said without video footage or an identity, there wasn't much that they could do unless it happened again, at which time I should call 911. Thankfully, I never experienced anything similar since, and I hope that I never will. So before I begin, perhaps a little bit of background information would help you understand my story. I'm a 20-year-old guy living in the Netherlands, and I've been a geek my entire life. Games in particular have always played a major role in my life, starting when I got my first PlayStation, back when I was 5 years old. Just something about gaming always got me, be it mechanically or in terms of storytelling. I could always find something to love about it. As I grew older, I got more and more into RPGs, and eventually found my way onto World of Warcraft. As I got more involved in the game, I started joining raiding guilds. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a group of players who intend on facing the game's hardest content as a team. The second guild I joined was the greatest bloody team of people I had met thus far. One of these people was a Swedish girl who was around my age called Maggie. We got along quite nicely, and as it turned out, her mom, who was also in the guild, was actually living in the Netherlands. So often we'd end up in conversations where she asked me to teach her some Dutch, and she'd teach me some Swedish in return. It was all good fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2013. The aforementioned guild had fallen apart a while back, and I had joined a new one. I'd stayed in touch with some of the people in that old guild, but Maggie really hadn't been online all that much. When she did get back online, we quickly caught up. It turned out that she actually moved in with her mother, and had spent the last couple of months improving her Dutch and attending a high school. She also started dating this guy called William, who was actually part of the same guild that I had met Maggie in. He always struck me as a nice guy. Other guild members seemed to think that he was a bit direct, and perhaps rude, but being Dutch, I understood that's just simply how our culture works, so I was always okay with it. June comes around. Me and Maggie recently finished our final exams and were waiting for the results to come back in. One afternoon while we were playing online, I suggested a meetup between the two of us. I really didn't have much to do, and given that she had voiced her concerns about finding her footing in Dutch social circles, I figured this was a nice opportunity to take her first baby steps into the country. She excitedly agreed and asked if she could bring William along as well. Obviously, I said yes, seeing as he was her boyfriend. Meetups are safer when you arrive as a couple, and meeting former guild members was something I was looking forward to anyway. A couple of days later, I met them both in Rotterdam and had a great day. I showed them around the city since I knew it best. We had some nice conversations, a few laughs, and we ended the day by taking a trip to the Euromast. Before leaving, Maggie had to go to the bathroom, so me and William were waiting outside for her. Striking conversation, I said to him, "You two make a nice couple." "Thanks," he replied. "I freaking love her, you know. Honestly, wouldn't know what I would do without her at this stage." Back then, I didn't think much of that statement. It's just a thing people say when they are in love. So kudos to him, right? Maggie returned from the restroom, we said our goodbyes, and we parted ways. A few weeks later, we got our exam scores back. I had passed high school with flying colors, but Maggie wasn't so lucky. She had failed most of her exams. She told me she was going to be studying for the rest of the summer in order to properly prepare for her rerun of the last year of high school. I told her that if she needed any help, that I was willing to see what I could do, even while I was in college. She was very thankful and assured me that she'd let me know if she needed any help. Fast forward again to September. After our last conversation, Maggie had practically disappeared from the internet. She hadn't logged into World of Warcraft, she was never on Skype, and wasn't even online on Facebook anymore. I had asked William in mid-August how she was doing, and he assured me she was fine, so I thought nothing of it. I even admired her focus on her education. However, during my second week of college, all of that changed. I got into the metro and picked up a free newspaper in the seat next to me to pass the time. I vividly remember turning to the fourth page to read a headline saying, "Swedish woman, 19, from X city, stabbed in own backyard." It took me a few moments to even realize that she lived in that city now, and that she was 19. Even though the article didn't mention a name, I was immediately concerned. I quickly sent Maggie a text message as we exchanged phone numbers when we met up, just to ask her if she was okay. The rest of the day went by, and I heard nothing from Maggie. I eventually figured that if anything had happened to her, people would have most likely started posting things on her Facebook page. Concerned and scared of what I was going to find, I started typing her name into the search bar of Facebook. Sure enough, it was already filling up with messages from people who had heard she passed away from her injuries. After inquiring with some other former guild members, it turned out William had stabbed her. She had broken up with him after she got her horrendous test results back, and he wasn't all too pleased with that. In the aftermath of the incident, me and some other Dutch guild members went to her city to meet up with her friends from school, attend the memorial for her there, and to put some flowers at the scene of the crime on behalf of everyone she had played the game with. When we met up with Maggie's school friends, we found out William hadn't been half as nice as we thought he was. During the relationship, he had been very controlling of Maggie, and after the breakup, he began stalking her and sending her threatening text messages. She even went to the police to report it, but they told her they couldn't do anything for her at that stage. After that, she met a different guy and began dating him. William found out and, well, took matters into his own hands. Thinking back at this, the worst part just came to mind. When we put flowers at the scene of the crime, we stood around for a few minutes, contemplating whether or not we should knock at the door and personally give her mother our condolences, given that we all kind of knew her as well. We decided against it, given that we might unintentionally remind her mother that Maggie's online connections ultimately cost her her life. As soon as we got back to our car, we saw Maggie's front door open. Out of the door came her mother, with Maggie's younger sister. I had known at the time that Maggie had a younger sister, but I didn't know that she was only 6 or 7. I f***ing lost it when I saw her little head hanging down while grabbing hold of her mother, scared to go around the corner to face all the drawings and flowers that people had left there. In telling the story, I found a very recent article that said William is most likely going to prison for 20 years, Honestly, William, I f***ing hope you never make it out of there. I was 10 years old when this occurred. My mother would often leave me in one of the arcades in a mall while she went to do some grocery shopping. One day, after several games, I decided to play Dance Dance Revolution and asked an employee, well, I thought he was an employee because of the way he was dressed, to teach me how to use the game. He was a tall and dark man with curly black hair and beard, and he seemed like he was in his late 30s, which made him look a lot older than the other two employees working at the time. But of course, since I was just a child, I didn't really care about such details. He looked nice and helpful, at first sight anyway. When I made the request, he obliged, taught me a little, and watched me closely as I danced through my first games. I didn't mind it at first, because I thought he was just trying to make sure that I could manage the game by myself, before tending to other kids or other game responsibilities. However, several songs later, he was still standing beside the game screen, watching me. I don't know exactly how to describe his stares, but they're the kind that made me feel just so unpleasant and uncomfortable that I could no longer concentrate on the game and eventually stop playing. Even just thinking back on the memory of his stares sends shivers down my spine. I decided to try other games, but he also followed me to every single one. I kept doing it, playing different games like every 5 minutes, hoping that he'd get fed up and leave me alone. But he didn't. What makes it even creepier is that his facial expression went from being the kind employee earlier to slowly turning to something a lot more serious and dark the longer he followed and stared at me. Then the realization hit me. Taking a closer look, this man was no employee. While his clothes could have easily been mistaken for one, he wasn't wearing the exact uniform that the other employees were wearing. Now, I was a really shy kid, and despite having so many other children, their parents, and other employees in the arcade, I didn't muster the courage to ask anyone for help. And since I was alone, everyone else around seemed to think that this guy was my guardian. I tried really hard to ignore his presence and just continued playing different games, hoping my tokens wouldn't run out and that my mother would come to pick me up soon. Until finally, I decided not to wait for my mother in the arcade any longer and to just go find her in the grocery stop that she was shopping in. I was about to go down the stairs. The arcade itself was located on the second floor, and the grocery was on the ground floor, when I noticed that this man was following me out the doors. He caught up to me fast, and to my surprise, he whispered something in my ear, though I couldn't hear him very well because of the noises from the arcade behind us. Noticing my confused and pale expression, he smiled creepily as he slowly grabbed my right shoulder and repeated more loudly this time, "What's your name? Do you want to come with me?" Fortunately, at that very moment, my mother came to pick me up. I looked back at the man, and all of a sudden, his expression had changed back to the kind and helpful guy who had guided me earlier in the game. Still shaken, I watched him as he played the nice guy to my mom, who hadn't suspected a single thing at that point. I didn't tell my mom that this guy was stalking and scaring me either. I just really wanted to leave and get out of there quickly. As we were leaving, I still remember looking back at the man once more, and I really wish I hadn't. He was still glaring at me when he waved, winked, and silently mouthed the words, "See you later." I can very honestly say that I've never been so scared throughout my entire childhood as I was that day. And just as bad, any fond memories that I may have held about DDR are now gone as well. I was roughly 8 or 9 years old at the time of this story. I remember the attachable LCD for the PlayStation 1 had just come out, which would put this around the year 2001. My mother, my brother, and I took a little trip one afternoon to our local Toys R Us. My brother and I love video games, so we would typically skip the rest of the store and head straight to the electronics section. I guess my mom thought the store was safe enough to leave us in that area while she looked around. I mean, the place was well lit. The rows of shelves were relatively low. The section had its own checkout counter and attendants. We weren't alone, since there were two of us, and my brother is 2 years older than me. Anybody could have seen someone grab a kid, though the thing is, these sick fucks tend to think premeditatedly, cautiously stalking and luring out their prey until they are ready to strike. A detail that no parent should overlook. So my brother and I split up, checking out the newest games and accessories, when I noticed someone talking to my brother. The guy was definitely not an employee. He was tall, Caucasian, with a slim build, gray hair, buzz cut, and seemed to be in his 40s or 50s. They talked for a bit, and then the guy went about his business. I went up to my brother and asked him what the man wanted. My brother was quieter than usual, and simply stated that the man had offered to buy him anything he wanted in the store. My brother conveniently left out what he would have to do in return. As a kid, I guess I couldn't fathom the man's true intentions, and merely thought he genuinely was going to buy the gift and leave us alone forever. The only thing running through my juvenile mind at that moment was to grab the most expensive game console I could see. So naive, I now know. Anyway, my brother knew better. He declined the man's offering, and he told me to completely forget about the notion. When we eventually rejoined my mom and exited the store, we were walking towards the car and away from Toys R Us. I looked at the adjacent street and spotted that man. I pointed and told my mom about him. He was staring right at us as he drove away in his hoodless Jeep, possibly still reeling from almost getting caught. I still remember this vividly, almost as if it happened yesterday. In fact, as an adult, there are times where I'm sure that I'm about to dream about it, but I wake up before the truly frightening part. I was a kid playing a console video game at Snyder's drugstore back in 1984, as my father bought a card for my mom a couple of aisles over. A tall, skinny, red-haired man in his 30s came over and told me that he was a police officer and needed to bring me to the station to ask me questions about stolen candy. He grabbed my hand directly off of the arcade console and led me out of the store, across the parking lot, into the street. We cross over and I remember crying to the guy, telling him I didn't steal any candy. He pulled me behind a church, and that's when I suddenly hear my father screaming my name frantically. I look off in the direction that I hear the yells and see his green Woody station wagon. I point at the car with my free hand and yell, "That's my dad. He'll tell you I didn't steal any candy." Thankfully, my dad heard me, threw the car in park, came running over, and shouted for me to get into the car and to stay there with the doors locked. The guy let go of my hand and began running behind the church. I ran to the car, and my dad ran after the guy. I laid on the floor of the car, just freaked out by what was happening and too scared to look out the window. My dad came back a few moments later. I'll never forget how white his hands were while gripping the ridges around the wheel, and there was blood running down his knuckles. He drove me home shouting the whole way to never walk away with anyone. I told him the guy said he was a cop. My dad started screaming incoherently in his native tongue about creepy liars trying to hurt kids. That night, my mom gave me a long talk about how some people are bad and they can't be trusted, how this world isn't a nice place, as she bandaged my father's hands. In that moment, I can remember my father whispering to my mom, "I think I knocked his tooth out, but I should have killed the bastard." This was my first real traumatic incident, the one where I realized that the world wasn't as simple as being a kid and trusting just any adult. A little bit of backstory here. In my late teens, think around the years of 18 or 19, I was no longer getting along with my parents and decided to move out of their house. I wasn't able to get very many hours at my job due to being a full-time college student, which meant at my already minimum wage job, for the very few hours I did get, I wasn't able to save very much money. Due to limited funding, my now ex-boyfriend's mother invited me to live with them. Now on to the actual story. My now ex and his mom were very strange people. I later found out that it was because both of them were on very large amounts of drugs. We'll call her L and him B to avoid any naming issues. Anyway, L and B had a lot of very strange friends that sometimes would come and stay at the house for weeks on end. Not days, weeks. I was always taught to be polite to guests growing up, even if they weren't your guest, or even if they were overstaying their welcome, which is probably why things in this situation happened the way that they did. Elle had decided since it was a Saturday, she was going to go grocery shopping, and B had to go with her. I was asked to come along but wanted some space, so opted to stay home and be alone instead. I was unaware that we had a guest at this time, and was slightly shocked when I came out of my boyfriend's room to find a woman around my age chilling on the couch. Out of politeness, I greeted her, made some small talk, while pouring myself a bowl of cereal. We quickly became friends due to similar interests and a similar taste in music and movies. Everyone else in that house hated scary movies, except for the both of us. So for the next 2 weeks that she was staying with us, I had someone to watch them with, in addition to having someone to secretly drink beer with, while chatting about bands such as Poison, Motley Crue, and Aerosmith. It was actually quite exciting for me. One night, we were playing a sort of game, similar to Truth or Dare, and she dared me to tell her the worst thing I'd ever done, which to this day is still shoplifting a lip gloss from the store when I was 13, getting caught. Then I ratted out my friends who were also stealing, so I wouldn't be the only one in trouble. I then asked her the same question. Her response, without much of a pause, was, "I stabbed my mom and dad in their throats. I know I shouldn't have, but I just hated them so damn much." At first, I was just shocked and stunned into silence. Then I began to laugh because it had to be a joke, right? She said yes, it was a joke. And then we both entered into a nervous phase of laughter, cracking up at her weird sense of humor. When I woke up the next morning, I went to have coffee, and our guest was gone. I was a little bummed, but figured she would come visit again. After all, most guests came and stayed multiple times a year. About 3 years went by. I had dumped B not long after this happened, and moved back in with my family. I searched for this girl guest up and down on Facebook, on and off throughout those few years, but was never able to find her. Then one day, my stepdad showed me a news story on the Yahoo homepage. It was about a couple who had been stabbed to death in their homes, and that their daughter, the one who had done it, had finally been caught. I recognized her instantly. It was that girl, someone that through the odd circumstances of life, I would have called her my friend. I never found her on Facebook, because I believe she gave me a fake name and a fake phone number to boot. Since then, I've not had any further contact with her, and while I don't know what it was that actually drove her to slay her parents, whether it was abuse, a fit of rage, or what, it's something that still rattles my cage to this day, to think that someone capable of murder is someone that I had no problem getting along with and bonding with over a short period of time. I didn't follow her case. I don't know where she's at now. And while I can wish her well because she was always sweet to me, I have a hard time doing that, knowing what it is that she's done. Even now, that confession that she quickly wrote off as a bad joke sticks with me, as I can sometimes hear it bounce around in my head years later. This happened to me about 2 or 3 years ago. When I was 16, I used to work at a fast food restaurant, and I live in a place where we have all the seasons. At this point in time, it was winter, so it got dark outside pretty early. I'd say no later than 5 or 6 p.m. I was called to come into work this particular day, but the weather was kind of bad, causing us to not have many customers. As a result, we ended up closing the store early that day. It was about 5:30 p.m. when my manager left, locking the store and making me wait outside for my ride. About 20 minutes had passed since she left, and I was really cold, so I decided, regrettably, that I would walk to a friend's house just a few blocks away, about a 10-minute walk, and wait for my ride there. The store I worked at was on a busy street that was near a residential neighborhood. As I walk away from the store, I started walking down the residential street behind the store. I was walking on the sidewalk to the left of the street, as there was only one sidewalk on the right side of the street. If I walked on the right sidewalk, I'd only be able to walk on it for a block. Then I'd have to walk the rest of the way on the road. There were also woods and patches of high grass on that side of the road. I felt it was convenient as well because on the left side of the street was my store and there were no streetlights. I walked about 3/4 of a block when I started to get this feeling that I was being watched. The block was long, making it roughly the equivalent of 2 city blocks. The neighborhood was already dark at this point. I had pretty much reached the end of the block and was getting ready to cross the street when I noticed the silhouette of someone walking on the right side of the road, near the edge of the woods. This person looked to be about 6 feet tall, slender, so I'm guessing about 180, maybe 200 pounds. I couldn't make out any features though. I'm the type of person who's very aware of their surroundings and slightly paranoid as I've been followed, stalked, and nearly kidnapped before. I think you get the gist. So when I noticed this person, I stopped walking and immediately got a sick feeling in my stomach. That's when the man noticed that I had noticed him, and he proceeded to walk slowly before yelling out to me, "Hey, come here. I want to talk to you." I say back, "No, I'm good." And I begin to turn around and start to walk back towards my store. He continues to yell things at me, trying to convince me to come back towards his direction. At this point, something in me told me to run, and I did just that. As I'm running, I know I shouldn't have, but I turned my head to see if he was actually chasing me. And to my horror, he was. I turned up the speed and ran as fast as I could. Thankfully, as I reached the store, my ride had just pulled up. So without breaking stride, I ran to the car. As I tried to get in, the door was locked. It took me another 10 to 15 seconds for them to unlock the car, which, in this state, it felt like hours. But eventually, I got in, locked the door, and broke down crying. Now, I'm not gonna lie, kind of out of shape, so my back was hurting and my lungs hurt from breathing so hard. I was all frazzled. This was the first time I was chased on foot, and let me tell you, it's so much more scary, surreal, and intense being chased on foot than having someone follow you by car. To this day, I still have the added trauma from this incident, and it makes it hard to go anywhere by myself, especially when it's dark. I don't know when that man stopped chasing me, or even where he came from originally, but by the time that I made it back to my job's parking lot, and as I peered around frantically, I never spotted him. I know that there are stories here of people being murdered, or maimed, or hurt in some other way, so it may be easy for others to come to the conclusion that you're fine, nothing even happened. But it's situations like these that linger with you, far beyond just the moments where they occur. They influence how you live your life, the things that you don't feel safe doing, the spaces that no longer feel okay to inhabit. So yes, the fear that I felt from those minutes of being chased were for certain some of the scariest of my life. But it's the low level of constant fear they impart that is simply the gift that keeps on giving. When I was in my late teen years, I was approached by 2 women in my neighborhood that asked me if I wanted to know about Jesus. I felt bad walking away as they seemed nice, so I let them speak to me. They invited me to their church and told me to come that Friday evening. I invited my boyfriend at the time because I thought, what the hell? Maybe we can learn something new about religion. When we got to the church, they made everyone sit down and played a PowerPoint presentation about motherly love. It was mostly about animals and how animal mothers have love for their babies. For some reason, it was hilarious to me and my boyfriend, and we had to stop ourselves from laughing. It was called the Church of God, and they basically believe God has two counterparts, and one is a woman, known only as God the Mother. The two ladies that I had spoken to had approached me at the end of the night and asked me if I wanted to get baptized the following Sunday and give my life over to God. I told them I needed to think about it because I still don't know much about the religion and wasn't sure of my relationship with God just yet. There was an English teacher that I had in high school who I knew was Christian, and I began to tell him about this church and the whole Mother God thing. He told me in all of his years of Christianity, he had never heard anything about God being a mother or a woman. He said to be wary of this church because it kind of sounded like a cult. After we had this conversation, I texted the main lady that I had spoken to, the one who was adamant about me getting baptized, and I told her that I didn't think that I wanted to do it. She got really angry and kept asking why. Why? She told me I needed to do it, and soon too, because if not, I would go to hell. I was no more than 16 at that point. She called me at least 20 different times and left me even more text messages saying I needed to come back to church next Sunday and get baptized before it was too late. I quickly blocked that number. A few weeks later, I saw that same woman in my neighborhood, but this time all alone. When we passed by each other while walking, she noticed me, and her facial expression turned extremely angry. She got right up in my face and made these weird hand movements. It looked to be sign language, but aggressive. Maybe she was throwing up Jesus hand signs. I don't know. But then she walked away. 4 years later, I ended up working at a coffee shop in my neighborhood. One evening, I locked the wrong gate while closing up and forgot a key inside, so I wasn't able to lock the outer gate. My friend was with me, so she watched the store, and I reached out to my manager. My boss told me to stop by her church down the block to get her copy of the key. It was the same church I got invited to back in high school. It was 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. I walked in hoping that I wouldn't see the lady who had tried to convert me, and went on to look for my boss. There were at least 50 women inside this church, all dressed in wedding gowns with veils over their heads. No men were in the church that evening. It looked like they were doing some weird ceremony. My boss told me to make sure that this never happened again while giving me the key. She told me then that she doesn't like being interrupted during church. As I left, I just kept thinking, what the hell type of ceremony were they doing? And why were they all dressed up as brides at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night? I did more research into this church after that and found out that it actually was a cult. The level of creep from that woman that originally tried to get me to join makes much more sense now. I'm glad I didn't hop on that train. Not sure the level of crazy or brainwashed that someone would need to be in order to make the premise of marrying the Lord make sense. In my research, I learned about a documentary that gave me a better idea of what the people of this church were up to. If you're interested, it's called Love Has Won, the Cult of Mother God. It shouldn't be hard to find, and the story behind it is actually quite heartbreaking. I live in a county that was pretty rural until the last 10, maybe 15 years. The biggest town in our county is pretty crowded now. Overcrowded, and I hate it. I moved from there to the countryside. I like where I live, except it can be really creepy at night because for miles and miles, it's dark and there are absolutely no streetlights. One thing about this county is that the main roads tend to get backed up really quickly if there's an accident or whatever else that may contribute to it, so it pays to go the back roads. The back roads, like any other rural place, are less populated more dark, lots of trees, and no sidewalks. Anyway, a few years back, something happened that almost made me stop using back roads altogether. I was driving home kind of late one night. I decided to take one particular back road that shaved off 10 minutes from my journey home. I was tired and had to get up early, so I was going fast, trying to get home as soon as I could. This road is a little more populated than some, but it's still super spooky in various stretches because huge trees grow alongside the road, and their branches and leaves make a tunnel of sorts. So I'm zipping through and round a curve, when up ahead, I see what I thought was a giant garden flag. You know, the flags that people put up in the spring in their yards? Well, I thought it was a weird flag because it seemed like it was fairly tall and large. Plus it was in the middle of the road. As I get closer, my headlights hit it, and it's not a flag. It's a person. A lady. She was wearing a red fez. Pause. I live in rural Maryland, and you just don't see a fez every day. Along with a flowy white dress and an orange reflective sash that sat just so across her chest. A little strange because she's in the middle of the street. As I drove past her, it only got weirder. As dark as it was, as I drove by, I could see she was about 60 years old. She had glasses, and I could see her bright blue eyes. She looked in my passenger window, and she started doing this weird bounce thing. I thought she was going to try and get into my car. Mind you, I'm going pretty fast. I don't know what it was about her, but she freaked me the out. I didn't think she was going to try to rob me. I really thought she was a soul snatcher or a skinwalker. I honestly didn't believe she was human. And even now, I can't adequately describe how creepy she was. I sped past her as fast as I could. I kept glancing in my back seat to make sure this entity, this woman, had not materialized in my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept watch in my rearview mirror. It was spring, so it was a little warm out, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. I finally make it home, and I run in to tell my mom the story. I got inside just as my brother was telling my mom about this weird lady he saw when he was driving home. It was the same lady, but he saw her at the intersection from the highway and the back road, whereas I saw her further down the back road. We both had the same reaction. She also tried looking in his car. She was also bouncing around when he saw her. He said there was a car in front of him that veered around the lady at full speed and kicked up plenty of dust and rocks, which made the scene even scarier. My brother was so freaked out that he won't travel that road anymore, even during the day. Eventually, I found out that lady lives in the woods. Apparently at one time, her family lived on that road. Her father was ill, and she tried to take him to the hospital. Unfortunately, he died on the way there, and she drove around with his body in her car for hours. I guess she has mental health issues now, and I think she lost the house or got kicked out. I have friends that live off that street, so when I was talking about this experience, they knew exactly who it was. I still go on that road, but I haven't seen her once since. I do hope that she's okay, but I really don't want to run into her again. Recently, I was having some trouble with neighborhood kids knocking on my door and running. I have severe PTSD from my time spent overseas, so this was causing particular issues at home. I was in contact with a police officer in the area who my mother knew. We met up at a coffee shop to discuss what I could do to make myself feel safer at home. This was all going fine until my mother brought up an old story from my childhood about when our house was broken into. My memory of this is waking up on Christmas morning and only having one thing under the tree because everything else had been taken. I was too young to really remember it, but I'm 35 now, and not one person has spoken to me about it since childhood, so I always just thought my version was correct. Except, it really wasn't. What actually happened was, My mother woke up in the night having heard a noise outside. She knew that there were burglaries going on in the area because my uncle, who lived next door, had his Christmas presents stolen. This is apparently where I must have confused the story. She got up in the dark and went down the hall to my room to pick me up. I couldn't have been more than 2 years old, but was wide awake, just standing up in my crib, wide-eyed. My mother flicked on the lights, and I said something to her about a man. She was freaked out then. We were all alone in the house, and when she looked down, she saw small patches of burned carpet and spent matches in my room. Whoever it was, they'd come in through the downstairs, lit matches, and dropped them at random at various spots in the house, obviously while still lit. My mother remembered that she could follow the entire trail from the back of the house to my room. Now back to the present. I'm staring at my mother in the coffee shop, coffee halfway to my face, and she's like, "What?" I said that I didn't recall this. I recalled something else. I told her quickly what my recollection was, and she was like, "Oh no, that was Uncle. We nearly died in a house fire." It was at that point that I had a fucking existential crisis right there in that coffee shop booth. I've been deathly afraid of fires all my life, to the point of having night terrors as a kid, with no explanation. Now, more than 30 years later, it makes so much more sense why I've held on to what I sincerely thought was an irrational fear of going up in flames. This took place a few years back, when I was about 20. I lived in a mid-sized college town with a pretty low crime rate. The apartment complex I lived in primarily housed students. Given that it was early August, before fall classes officially began, the complex was empty. To make matters even worse, it was the brief period of time between August 1st, when leases ended, and August 15th, which was move-in day. So the only people at the apartment complex would be people that not only stayed in town for summer, but also had renewed, or at least extended, their leases. That being said, the complex was empty. Seriously, I swear there was maybe a handful of people living in this complex, which probably housed around 300 people during the school year. That night, I was just chilling in the living room, playing video games and doing whatever. All of my roommates had moved out a few days prior, so I was completely alone. Around 11:30 p.m., I was in the kitchen cleaning when I went to throw something away and noticed that the garbage can was almost overflowing. I took the bag out, immediately noticing that whatever fruit I had thrown away the other day was definitely beginning to rot. At this point, I head to the front door to take the trash out, when I was suddenly overcome with this feeling, a feeling of dread, I suppose. I don't know quite how to explain it, but I just remember a cold feeling washing over me and my stomach sinking. My intuition was telling me that I shouldn't go outside, but of course, being the idiot that I was, I decided to ignore that intuition, primarily because the trash bag stank, and I didn't want to have to smell it first thing in the morning tomorrow. Plus, the dumpster was right outside my building. It would take me maybe a minute tops to take out the trash. So I gathered up the bag and headed out the door. Since it was such a short walk, I decided not to even put on any shoes. So here I am, walking barefoot down the steps and into the parking lot, carrying a trash bag and a box of recycling, wearing just shorts and a tank top, when I noticed something off. The parking lot, which would have 25 to 30 cars in it normally, was empty except for my car and two others. The odd thing was that one of the other cars was on, idling, with the headlights turned off. It was a white truck, kind of beat up and old, with a ladder on top and some boxes. Hard to tell. That parking lot had a grand total of one single street lamp. I thought it was odd because it definitely looked like a work truck, given the ladder. There was no reason for that truck to be parked here at night, especially not with people inside. I was about halfway to the dumpster when I finally got close enough to see who was sitting inside that truck. From what I could tell, there were at least 2 men, late 20s, early 30s, sitting in the truck. The guy in the driver's seat, closest to me, didn't notice me initially, until the guy next to him pointed in my direction. As soon as that man turned towards me, my blood ran cold, and I briefly paused. My gut was telling me to run back up into my apartment. Of course, I didn't do that. I reasoned that perhaps they were waiting for someone, or maybe it was a drug deal. I thought it would look worse if I suddenly bolted instead of just throwing my trash away as planned. So I continued walking towards the dumpster, trying to make it look like I didn't care about them at all and was just casually taking out the trash. All the while, the 2 guys in the car continued to talk to each other, pointing and gesturing towards me. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the window was rolled down, so I definitely heard them talking. When I finally reached the dumpster, the 2 guys had gone silent. They were now just staring at me, leering more like. I slowly lifted the trash bag above the dumpster, and as soon as I let it go, the truck immediately reverses. That's when I say screw it, drop the box of recycling, and take off running. I hear the tires of the truck literally squeal behind me as I'm sprinting across the parking lot. I hardly even notice the sharp pieces of rock and other debris that are stabbing into the soles of my feet as I run. I made the quick decision to run up a different staircase than the one I had come down in an effort to throw them off. I get back into my apartment, slam the door shut, then lock and deadbolt it. I ran to the sliding glass door that leads out onto the balcony, made sure that that was locked. I'm a little bit paranoid at this point, but hey. Then I closed the blinds. I took a split second to catch my breath before I realized that the blinds of my bedroom window were most likely open, and my lights were definitely on. I jogged to my bedroom, turned off my lamp, then slowly approached the window. That's when I noticed the truck, still no headlights, creeping through the parking lot. This one is on the opposite side of the first parking lot. The apartment building was situated in between them. The truck stops right beneath my window. I hit the ground as quickly as possible, hoping that they didn't see me. It's absolutely silent for a few moments before I hear someone shout something that sounded suspiciously like, "Damn it." I didn't dare look out my window again. I just sat there, curled into a ball on the floor of my bedroom. After a few minutes, the sound of the truck's engine began to fade. I peeked out the window then and was thankfully met with the sight of an empty parking lot. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I had a few other creepy encounters during the 2 years I lived at this apartment, but this one by far remains the scariest. The one good thing I took from this experience is to trust my intuition, even if I can come up with reasons against it. I have no idea what those guys were doing in the parking lot that night, nor do I have any idea why they chased after me.